Okay, Ozonics Killerwinds podcast back again. I am super excited, as you can see by my huge stack of papers. If I've got a stack of papers, it's getting serious. Who do we have here today, Nick?
We are joined today by our new and very good friend, Jace Elliot. He is the state deer biologist in Iowa. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jace?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So, as you said, I'm the state deer biologist with the DNR, so I'm overseeing population management, research projects, administering our different surveys and things like that, coming up with regulatory proposals like, our county deer quotas, which are subject to change annually, things like that. Disease monitoring, EHD, CWD, all that stuff. I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of that, hopefully. But I've been here about 3 years, grew up in central Wisconsin, got my master's degree at Auburn University Deer Lab down there. Cool. That's kind of where I cut my teeth with the deer stuff and came up here afterwards.
Awesome.
Interesting. Went to Auburn. There was a guy, the president of Iowa State years and years ago was a guy named Stephen Leith. And then he left Iowa State and he went to Auburn for a few years. He might have been there, if you were there 3 or 4 years ago, he might have been there kind of about that same time.
Interesting, okay.
Or had just left, because then I think he ended up at NC State.
Gotcha.
But anyway, that's just kind of funny. Yeah, it's interesting how there are a lot more of these universities that are having these like whitetail deer type of, departments and things that you can study. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, and it's definitely like a deep south phenomenon, like Mississippi State, UGA, Auburn.
UGA, Yep. Georgia has a good one.
Yep, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting.
I mean, game management down there is a pretty serious topic, and there's a lot of projects going on.
That's cool.
Interesting.
So did you, I'm assuming you're, a deer biologist, but did you have a pretty big background in hunting, like growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's totally what led me down this path.
Yep.
I mean, I was starting to go to deer camp when I was like 10 with my grandpa.
Yep.
Started hunting when I was 11 or 12, whatever the age is. Started hunting in Wisconsin at the time. And never looked back. I mean, it's my favorite thing, my biggest passion for sure.
Yeah. So, heck yeah, that's awesome.
Do you feel like you got into the biology side because you wanted to make a difference? Like from a legislative side, did you get into it for the biological side of it? Like or the conservation side? Like what kind of led you to say, I want to work for the DNR?
So it wasn't always a straightforward path. Like for a while, I mean, when I started my undergrad at University of Wisconsin in Madison, I didn't really plan to go into natural resources. I actually wanted to go to law school, and I got so far as taking the LSAT, and I was pretty close to continuing down that road. I was working at a firm in Madison for a couple years, and that experience I'm thankful for because it kind of showed me maybe this isn't what I want to do. And I'm sure a lot of people don't get that kind of exposure early on.
Absolutely.
So I did a pretty big pivot halfway through my undergrad, and I got a degree in conservation biology.
There you go.
And it was sort of more of a holistic degree. Like I learned a little bit about wildlife, a little bit about fisheries and conservation management in general, and at that point, I knew I wanted to go to grad school, but I still didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with the degree. So it's kind of been like, clay drying over time and led me to where I'm at. But when I was down in Alabama, I did a lot of work on like the private side with, big landowners that are, putting a lot of resources and input into managing properties and stuff like that. So I kind of saw that side of thing. And down there's a lot of opportunities for careers, managing properties and stuff, which is different than in the Midwest, I'd say.
You see a lot of that type of management opportunity in careers in like Texas as well.
Exactly, absolutely.
Yeah. Like I had some friends that were from Texas and they have ranches down there, and they'll hire either the state of Texas or private independent contractors that will come in. They'll do helicopter studies. They'll say, okay, this is how many bucks you have, this is how many does you have. We can build you a 5-10-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
This is the quality of your deer herd. The state of Wisconsin does a lot of that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, my buddy Jim's involved in some of that.
Deer management program.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he works with other landowners in his area that work with a biologist, and then they come out and they do deer surveys, and they just say, hey, this is the quality of the herd that's here. Yeah, I feel like you see more and more of that in the state of Iowa, but I don't feel like it's like that here as much.
Right. Yeah. Well, we don't have, so they're called DMAPs in a lot of states. So Deer Management Assistance Program, I believe, is what that stands for. And we don't have that currently. But we have private lands biologists throughout
Okay.
the state that do work with landowners, sort of one-on-one. And, it's not always about deer, of course. It's, some landowners are interested in increasing pollinator habitat and things like that. But we do have some really good folks that are specialized in that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then, of course, we have like a deer depredation or a wildlife depredation program, so to speak, that also works with our private landowners.
Yep.
I'm involved in the depredation side.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, kind of by pure chance when I first started. So I'm a part of the depredation program at what they call Clausen's Cove in Clear Lake. So it's right on Clear Lake.
Okay.
It's land owned by the Nature Conservancy, but then they work with the state. So they work with Ross Ellingson.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And then he works with a couple other landowners in this area. And then just by pure chance, I ended up hunting on one of the landowner that he works with.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really neat program.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And it's interesting. We'll get to this later, but this report, this review of the Iowa deer management back in 2009, there's a lot in here about pushing for that depredation program and how that was really first being set up. You know what I mean? And they were talking about some of the zones. Actually, there's Ross's name is in here.
Yeah.
On one of the zones. He was more in like northeast Iowa.
Yeah.
Now he's maybe he's still over there too, but he does some of these central counties too.
Yeah.
But it's been really, really interesting to work with him and getting to know him. And he's a hunter too.
Yeah.
And a passionate whitetail hunter.
Yeah. He's definitely one of our best.
Yeah. Super cool guy.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. You talk about like that depredation stuff, getting to know him and talking to him about that. It seems like as much as it is about harvesting the deer, it's as much as about putting pressure on some of the property too.
Yep.
And I think I've really seen that over the years in these pieces that I've hunted, especially the one, it's the private farmer. That's not the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah.
That you can definitely see just the pressure that it's put on and just kind of the deer they figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, I mean, you're there. I mean, how many more extra months,
Yeah.
2.5, 3 months extra, I mean, that's a lot more pressure than what they're used to,
But I feel like, and I don't mean to kind of go off on this, but I think that depredation program, I feel like is a really good example of, the ebb and flow. And that's kind of what I really am interested to hear from you today about is like depredation, for example. I love it because I love to shoot deer.
Yeah.
Right. I love to shoot deer. I love to harvest deer. I love to cut them up. I love to give the meat to friends. I love that. I love it. I love eating it and giving it away. I mean, you know me. I mean, I really
100%.
do. I love it. Giving it to friends and family.
That's not a lie.
Yeah. I mean, if you we have thought out deer, we should have some deer sausage now. I got some in the fridge.
Yeah, thaw 'em
literally,
out
we do.
right
We
now.
have some in the fridge. Like I'm a big deer meat guy.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is like the depredation program is awesome, but then a lot of people, like a lot of hunters would look at that and go, well, you're pressuring your property.
Yep.
And if you're trying to, it seems like a lot of people now in the state of Iowa are trying to shoot big deer. It's not very conducive to depredation hunting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, there's that kind of ebb and flow.
Yep.
I think for the Iowa DNR is the same way. It's like, you guys are trying to manage and you're trying to keep a lot of people happy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just got to be so hard. I feel like the depredation is a perfect example
Yep,
of that.
it is. It's a great tool we have. Where the depredation program shines is like local property, like scale issues.
Yes.
So we can manage our deer populations at the county scale pretty successfully.
Yeah.
Safe to say that the majority of our counties are, in my opinion, being a good balance between the costs and the benefits of having deer on the landscape.
Yep.
But there's instances where within that county you can run into property damage or agricultural damage, and that's where this depredation program really shines because it can focus in on where the issue's occurring while not necessarily changing the hunting experience in the surrounding area of the county necessarily. So
Yes.
But you're right, there is some contention involved. I mean, when hunters who hunt on general unisex tags primarily are looking at it and saying like, well, the property next to mine, there's a lot of harvest going on that didn't used to happen.
Yep.
But what I always encourage people is to try to just think about it like big picture, like you explained it. I mean, it's, we're not managing deer for hunters in a vacuum. We're managing a healthy deer population that involves, good hunting opportunity, which I think is safe to say in most of the state we have.
Yeah.
But also minimizing damage.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I'll tell you what, that's the thing too, I think with that depredation program is since the beginning when I've been involved, the narrative has been very consistent. you're hunting, but we're out here, we're trying to harvest deer. You're not out there, you know, like Ross was very, very clear with me. He's like, because I'm like, well, how do I do this? Like, because I want to shoot the big buck in the fall too. You know,
Yeah.
he's like, he goes, listen, man, just shoot whatever walks by.
Yeah.
You know, shoot whatever walks by. And if you do happen to shoot bucks, you know what I mean? Like you have to give the racks to the state, you know what I mean? And then they confiscate them and burn them or do whatever they do with them, you know? So that's kind of what I've done. I just shoot whatever deer walks by, you know what I mean? And like, you know, if it's the summer depredation tags, I get doe tags as well during the regular season. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. And like I said, I feel like it's been very well explained and it kind of really answered my questions. I'm like, well, how do I do this? But you're right. There can be contention because part of the reason on the one spot that I get to do a lot of depredation hunting is because the neighbor doesn't want any deer shot. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
you know, and so, you know, and yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I at times, like I said, even before we started, I was telling you, I don't envy you guys. I think the head guys have a tough job.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being a teacher, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like if there's how many days of the school year, the teacher's like, you know, nobody like walks up to them every day and tells them good job, but the parents are going to be there when the kid's naughty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's like, I think it's easy for hunters at times to kind of be the backseat drivers and feel like we know what's best when hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
But
But I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's definitely a privilege to do this kind of thing
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you know, it's such an important resource with a long history and tradition in Iowa, and so it's just exciting to get to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what I think, let's just get into it right away. And part of what kind of led us to having you here today was the deer survey.
Yeah.
You know, I was lucky enough to be one of the people that it was interesting too. Like I was one of the people that got the survey.
Yep.
And Nick knows I'm a fact guy, man. I love facts.
Yeah.
You give me like this, all this. You just give me some facts. Like I'm running, man. I can just like a whole day can go by.
We're going to get him a shirt.
Oh, geez. I love facts.
Just says fact guy on it.
Yeah, fact guy, the fact guy. But so that's where we saw you was on that. Actually talking about the survey on the annual meetings.
Yep.
But you had a big part in coming up with that survey, figuring out what the questions are. So just initially, were you guys happy with the response? Because I felt like when I first looked at it, and I'm like, okay, if this is a certain percentage of all hunters, I was like, man, you got to figure out a way to get a lot more people to fill it out.
Sure. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So were we happy with the response, which, by the way, was about 25% response rate once we accounted for undeliverable addresses and issues like that. Yeah, I was. And that might sound surprising, but when we've had, and you know, you took the survey, it's a long survey. It was like over 10 pages.
Yes.
Probably took you about 15 minutes, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
That's not something we're expecting every hunter to do. Take the time to fill out, send it back.
Yeah.
Now, we did offer an online survey as well, which captured about half of our response, which helped. But what we ended up with was enough of a sample size, you know, about 4,000 respondents, which is plenty of data to make, you know, inferences and conclusions.
That was my other question is what was the number that you were hoping to get to be so you could say, hey, this is enough to feel like we have a sample size. 4,000 is that number?
It was, I mean, like if we ended up with a few thousand, even 2,000 or 3,000.
You could extrapolate
We
from
could
that.
have. I think so. And
Okay.
so what's important is that sample that we drew from was stratified by age. It was stratified by license type. So we didn't just get landowners or just, you know, people hunting on general tags. It was a mix. And then stratified by geographic region. So we wanted to hear from everyone in the state, all the age ranges and whatnot. So I think it was pretty successful in doing so. You know, in that episode, you did bring up sort of the skew of the age. Like it was a much more 44 to 55-year-olds. But that's reflective of our hunting population.
Absolutely.
So really, things ended up looking pretty good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting too. We talk about this at Ozonics a lot, right? And I think you talk about this in the quote unquote the hunting industry.
Yeah.
Like Ozonics is selling a product.
Yep.
Right. And I think we sell to 3 different people. We sell to the son, the dad, and the grandpa.
Yep.
That's who we sell to.
Yeah.
And the DNR has really 3 groups of people too. And you could say, and I'm not, and again, I don't want to sound like a terrible person there. You could also put women in there. You know what I mean? Like the son, the dad, the grandpa, the son, the daughter, dad, and grandpa. You know what I mean? Or however you want to say it. You know what I mean? Like it's not like there aren't women hunters, because I know I've got a couple in my house.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so it's interesting because there is the son, the dad, and the grandpa mostly, right? And I did think that it did seem like there was more dads and grandpas, you know what I mean, in the survey, but I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So
Yep.
yeah, no, I thought that was, I really enjoyed that. The one thing and we went to the meeting, right?
The listening session?
Yeah, the listening, they had one in Ventura.
Yep.
So we went to that one and they asked for questions. And of course I can't not raise my hand. So one of the things that I asked them is I was like, a lot of questions about crossbows. You know what I mean? A lot of questions about cellular trail cameras. Where is that? Where is the intention of those questions coming from?
Yep.
Is that coming from pressure within the state from residents or non-residents? Is that coming from pressure from other states or from manufacturers or special interest groups or people complaining or just you guys as hunters yourselves feeling the ethical moral dilemma? I mean, where does that where is that coming from?
Good question. I'll say that I think first and foremost, it comes from just foresight into. So if we don't ask questions, we don't know the answers, right? And we don't have a defensible stance to take about these things. Like if we can assume what hunters think, well, that's not very.
When you know when you assume, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I can't say that on the family podcast, but there's a saying about assuming.
Right.
Yeah.
And so first of all, we just wanted to get a baseline of data and understand our hunters better. I think that was the biggest objective was to just know that, customer base and what do they want? How are they feeling about all these different topics? But you're right that there was specific attention paid to crossbows, additional rifle calibers, and emerging technology in general.
Yeah.
And a big reason is that we saw a lot of states to our west begin to regulate things like trail cameras.
Colorado, New Mexico, Utah.
Yep, exactly. And that happened the year that I started working on this survey. I thought, they did it. A lot of those states did a good job of asking their hunters how they felt before they made regulations.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really good model. And I felt like if we don't ask the questions, we won't have any, evidence to draw from.
Yes.
And more importantly, we see these topics come up a lot in legislature every year, right? So, especially weapons like crossbows, additional rifle calibers. So that, whether you want to call it pressure or just attention to those topics is there.
Yep.
And I think that we're responsible to all of our stakeholders, and a big stakeholder group is hunters.
Yep.
And because of that responsibility, I thought that, asking questions about those topics will situate us well to represent that collective interest when the time comes. If we're asked about, potential crossbow legislation, we have data we can show, whether people feel favorably or not, basically. And I think that was one of the biggest objectives as well, is just to get the ducks in the row. When the topic inevitably comes up in the legislative session, now we have data to point at, which can help inform the future direction.
Interesting.
Yep.
With that said as well, do you feel like, so for example, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, again, first off, I really appreciate being asked. That means a ton to me.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because I'm getting older, I find myself talking about politics more and feeling like I should care and yelling at my wife, it makes a difference. We pay taxes, you know what I mean? But so maybe I'm just getting old, but I do really appreciate being asked, feeling like I have a voice. That means a lot to me.
Yeah.
It really does. Seriously, dude, for what it's worth, whoever you need to tell that to, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great.
You know what I mean? I mean, even when I got the survey, I felt bad because I saw that it had been sent out, I think digitally at first, right?
A postcard.
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally ignored it.
Yeah.
I ignored it. And then I got the actual thing in the mail and I'm like, yes, I will.
Yep.
I'm like, heck yes, I will. But I went through the whole thing, But again, going back to that crossbow thing. So one of the things I thought that was interesting when I saw a lot of the questions, and with Ozonics, we travel a lot during the wintertime, go to different consumer shows. One of the things that I never ever thought about, or the perspective that I had never had, was about crossbows, for example. And it's funny because my stance on crossbows, I don't know that I want to see them during the regular bow season, right? But I think for kids, I think for women or just young people getting into hunting, I think it's a great option. You know what I'm saying? You know, I used to work as a hunting guide in Colorado.
Okay.
And we would have a lot of young kids or women that would come and shoot a crossbow. And the kids, they call it a bow and arrow. You know what I mean? They don't know.
Yeah.
Like they you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like it gets a lot of people into it. I know if I had the opportunity to get my little boy Jet, he would hunt with a crossbow right now, right? I mean, part of the reason he doesn't bow hunt right now is because I take him to Shields and I go look at the youth bows and I talk to the guy and the guy said, he goes, listen, he goes, drawing it back's not the issue. He goes, have him hold it up for 10 seconds. I go, wait a second. He goes, seriously, have him hold it up. I go, okay, Jet, hold it up. And he holds it up, you know, like 5 seconds in, Jet's like, oh, and he goes, that's the problem. They can't hold him up.
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, that's what would be great about crossbows.
Yep.
You could put it on a tripod and they can hold that thing forever.
Yeah.
They can't hold the bow up.
Right.
He goes, if somebody would come out with a really lightweight youth bow, we'd be in business, but they're too heavy.
Yeah.
You know, so, but getting back, my point is when we go to the Pennsylvania Great American Outdoor Show, they have Lancaster Archery right across from us. Okay. And they sell all sorts of stuff there. They sell compounds, they sell crossbows, they sell everything archery. And over here to the right is their crossbows. And you watch for those 9 days, they sell crossbow after crossbow after crossbow. And you talk to those guys run around with their heads cut off the whole time.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you ask them, you're like, who's buying crossbows? And like, dude, rifle hunters. Rifle hunters aren't buying vertical bows; they're buying crossbows.
Yep.
Yeah.
My question with that then is do you guys, as state of Iowa, do you go to other states and ask them, hey, you know, what are the ebbs and flows? What are the pros and cons since you guys have legalized crossbows? Because you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
It does. And
are you going out and asking those questions?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of communication between my counterparts in other states. We have like an annual meeting every year, and that's always a topic, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
You know, Iowa is, as far as I'm aware, the last stronghold.
I know. It's like the last one that's like holding it up.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, there's not many left.
No, and a lot of states, you know, that change was made in Wisconsin when I was a hunter there. So I observed anecdotally how the landscape changed a little bit during bow season, and and then of course there's states like Pennsylvania who's had it a while, and they've had some serious changes in trends in harvest. Like a lot of their harvest is now absorbed in the archery season that didn't used to be the case.
That's what I'm getting.
Right,
at.
and what
you're
a lot
saying,
of those
you're saying it way fancier than I am, but that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Well, you know, what I've heard from the other deer biologists is that it's kind of what you're saying too. It's not vertical bow hunters changing to crossbows. You're getting a whole new suite of hunters that didn't used to participate in that season crossing over. And now I think that if we were to make that change in Iowa, we would see that tenfold, because we have separate unisex tags, right? So if somebody is normally just a firearms hunter, they're only going to get one unisex tag. They can pick what season. But now here's an opportunity to participate in another season, shoot another buck. So I think it's fair to assume that we would see a lot more hunting in the archery season with crossbows from people who didn't normally buy those licenses.
Yeah.
In my head, I'm saying, don't do it. Don't do it. And that's the whole thing. I mean, dude, this conversation stresses me out. I'm glad that I work at Ozonics and not for the Iowa DNR, because you guys got a hard job. I'm telling you, you know,
Yeah,
it's like
there's probably so many other people that are saying, please
dude,
do it.
It's just like farmers, you know, like everybody's like, oh, I'm going to be great to be a farmer. I'm like, dude, I wouldn't know when to plant, when to spray, when to harvest, when to sell. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, because you don't know what you know till you know it.
Yeah.
And gosh, that would be so hard. Because that's what you just said there is what scares the living daylights out of me. Is to go, because again, dude, I've lived in Iowa pretty much my whole life.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, you know, you could go in the 90s, in the early 90s, even, you know, early 2000s, if you went up and knocked on a guy's door for permission to bow hunt, they just were like, you want to do what? You know what I mean? Like bow hunting just wasn't a thing. It was, but you know, shotgun hunting has always been, you know, the camouflage for shotgun season in Iowa is Carhartt brown and blaze orange.
Yeah.
And usually acacia bush light in the back end. You know what I mean? So like that part makes me nervous, right? Like to see those guys spilling over into the bow season. Where it's like you're trying to get in and get out and kind of be trying to be quiet, and then there's all these guys just walking out with a crossbow over their shoulder.
Yeah.
That makes me nervous.
So,
but I'm not the only guy. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that has an opinion.
Yeah,
you know?
and you know, and we're not gonna we're not really in the business to take a stance on something like this, right? Like if a change comes, it's going to be generated in the legislature almost positively, right? That's how these changes happen typically. But what we can do is look at how we can expect things to change if that were to happen. For instance, what we boast about a lot in Iowa is our trophy deer quality. And I mean, we are, as far as I'm concerned, like the destination deer hunting state.
Absolutely.
Now, we might not have as many trophy book entries
We're
as
the
Wisconsin.
Iowa's the Kleenex of the category.
Right, it is. Exactly. And if you look at record book stuff, we might be lower on the list, but we also harvest far lower deer. And I'm also of the opinion that a Boone and Crockett deer in a lot of parts in Iowa isn't going to get a second look. And I've seen that firsthand, and it's mind-blowing to me coming from Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I've
dude, you know me. It's been 7 or 8 years since I've shot a buck, and I've passed a lot of good deer because I'm looking for a mature monster.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I'll shoot the does,
Yeah.
And so I guess then it begs the question of why do we have such a good quality deer herd here? And I think you can look at the landscape and say, well, there's a lot of food resources. We do have cover. I mean, we don't have the most habitat-rich state necessarily, but where we do have habitat, it's pretty conducive to deer.
Yep.
There's a lot of agriculture, so for a lot of the year, they have good cover or food. But that doesn't fully explain the situation because you can look at other states and see a similar landscape, but not a similar deer herd.
Yeah.
So then you have to look at how do we structure our seasons and what things are in place that allow that high quality to be achieved. And I think you can look at really just a few things. First of all, we protect bucks during their most vulnerable period of time during the rut.
That's 100% what I was going to say. If you held a gun in my head,
Amen,
brother, because that's when we go around and we go to all these different states. Everybody's like, what does Iowa do different? I'm like, it's very simple.
Yeah.
You can only bow hunt during the rut.
Right.
It's not Minnesota when they're in the
Right.
peak of the rut. All of a sudden, all the guns start going off. It's not Illinois. It's not Wisconsin. You can only bow hunt during the rut. That I feel like is the key piece. But please go on. Sorry.
Well, and I also
you
think
are like I feel like there could be like angels singing in the background right now. I'm loving this.
we also have the most restrictive methods of take allowed in any other state. I mean, we've only recently began to allow a lot of centerfire rifles to be used, and it's still a very limited list.
Yes, January antlerless.
Exactly.
Right? Very, very limited.
Yep. And even the straight walls we allow, I mean, they're not the deer calibers you think of.
You're
like
not shooting.
30-06
You're not shooting 300 yards.
Right.
No.
It's 100 and under. It's maybe 150 if you really push it.
Exactly.
Yep. It's not like you're shooting a mile.
Yeah.
Right.
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 Yeah.
And so I think that you can look at things like that and say that that's probably led us to where we're at. And so obviously, I would be of the opinion that should be protected as long as we value the deer herd that we have.
Yes.
Yep, exactly.
Oh man, I'm loving this. Yeah,
is
dude,
great.
it's really really interesting, man. It's really interesting because man, it's funny when I hear you talking about this. It's it's always a moving target, right? But I feel like the state of Iowa has done some things right. They've protected the rut. You know what I mean? There's a limited method of take.
Yep.
But there's always all this outside influence, and it's like, oh, well, maybe we make this little change. But you would hate to see that target move way over here.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And man, that's just so tricky.
I mean, there's consequences to every
Absolutely.
change. It's always a give and take.
Yep.
So, changes that might allow more people to participate, might increase hunting opportunity. Well, there's going to be a cost, and people have to be aware of what that would be when they're thinking about it.
Yes. So you were talking about, obviously, if there was ever changes to happen, it has to come at a legislative level. When we were at the annual meeting that they had, one thing they talked about is that Executive Order 1 or the Executive Order 10, okay, that is freezing all legislative changes like that because they're trying to rewrite the code, make it simpler.
Yeah. So
Is that Executive Order 10 gonna not allow legislative changes to the DNR for this year? Or what does that mean? Can you explain that better?
Yeah, so really all that's happening is that all of our regulatory chapters, all of our rules, right? Like what's in the rigs books or what the rigs books references, not to be confused with law that comes from the legislature, but simply our department's regulations. And those two things often get confused.
Yes, I think that's where I'm getting that.
Our
I'm blending that together.
Our regulations are all getting reviewed. Okay. So every chapter, we have a deer hunting chapter, we have a waterfowl hunting chapter, and dozens of other chapters, of course, that don't pertain to hunting in the department. And this is a statewide executive order. So as far as I'm aware, every state department is having all of their regulations reviewed.
Okay.
And there is basically an effort to simplify and streamline a lot of the language, which there's going to be, plenty of good to come out of. It's a lot of work, but it's also, we're going to come out with more clear and concise regulations, and I think that's a good thing.
Cool.
So, yeah. But as far as I'm aware, it's not freezing any legislation. In fact, this last session that just ended in, a couple months ago at least, has, there was deer bills on there on the table. A lot of them didn't make it, but there's still a potential for legislative changes to be made.
So basically the whole thing is I was confusing the Executive Order 10 and the rules within like the department that are being just simplified and the laws.
Yeah.
It's two completely different things.
Yeah.
When I heard that, I thought they meant that like, hey, there won't be any new real laws passed until this Executive Order 10 is completed. And that's where I had it confused. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. So getting back to the survey a little bit. So do you feel like, can you kind of extrapolate on what you felt like were the real, the things that you walked away from the survey, like, man, I'm really, really happy about this, or looking back, I'm like, man, I wish we would have gone deeper into this, or,
Sure.
How do you feel about that when it comes to the...
Yeah, and it's a hard, as you can imagine, hard question to answer because there were so many topics.
Yeah, there was so much.
But I can just get started. The first thing that jumped into my mind that I thought was the coolest was looking at what motivates deer hunters in Iowa.
Yeah, that was.
And
that really surprised me.
If you noticed,
too.
we asked the question in two different ways, right? So we had them first identify just one of their primary motivation, whether it was meat, trophy, social, recreation, right? And then the next question, they had to basically rate their level of agreement to the following statements, like, I hunt deer to, and so on and so forth. So be out in nature, to harvest a trophy buck, to fill my freezer.
Yep.
And what I did was I basically crafted 3 statements for each category that they were asked previously. So we could kind of compare how they actually played out.
Yep.
And surprisingly or unsurprisingly, they reflected each other almost perfectly. So we saw that social, recreation, and meat-oriented hunters are the majority. Yep. And then you have social, trophy, and management-oriented hunters, I believe, as sort of the more minor groups.
Yeah.
But that's like great information for me to have, because it's like, we hear and talk a lot about trophy hunting in Iowa, and there's, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that like the pursuit of a mature buck is an honorable one, right? And I think that sometimes trophy hunting gets maligned for the wrong reasons.
Yep.
So just as, worthy of a pursuit as filling a freezer, if you ask me. But for our residents, that does not appear to be a big primary factor. And that surprised me.
Well, and I think from my perspective, what I think that means too is that I think sometimes we that are in the quote unquote hunting industry, we get really close to the idea of the pursuit of a mature deer.
Yep.
But the reality is that is not the average guy day to day. You know what I'm saying? Like, we talk about all the time at Ozonics, you know what I mean? Like, even me, I'm married, 5 kids. I don't get to hunt every day of the season. There are a percentage of guys that get to go out there every day in October, every day in November, and they shoot big deer year after year after year. But that's a lot of times, I think that's the exception, not the rule.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Because the most of us hunt on the weekends. You know what I mean? We take a few handfuls of PTO days at that right time when we get out there.
Yeah.
And if 140 or inch deer walks by, like, okay, I'm going to shoot that deer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and again, like, or man, I really need to get some meat in the freezer. You know what I mean? Like, or man, I've got my boy with me. I want to celebrate and have him help me field dress this thing.
Yeah.
Like there's other motivation than just the perception of what we see on social media all the time.
Oh yeah, right. The big antlers are like a flashy thing, right?
Yes.
And like I myself, when I'm bow hunting in November, I'm definitely targeting a mature buck.
Right.
Whether it works out or not is a different matter, but that's what I'm going out there to shoot. But first and foremost, I'm enjoying the process, whether I shoot one or not. And I think that gets lost on a lot of like the media portrayal of deer hunting, but it's clear that at least with Iowa's resident deer hunters, that's still first and center in their minds is just enjoying the process, enjoying being out in nature, observing wild animals and all of that. So that was super cool to see. And I think it kind of goes against the grain of how we think of our hunters as, very trophy motivated.
Yes. I'll tell you one thing that I thought was pretty interesting about the survey too was how many hunters are hunting on private ground that they have permission for?
Yes.
I really love that question.
Yep.
Because I think, again, there's this perception. Again, when we travel for ozonics, you hear so many people talk about Southeast Iowa and Southern Iowa being so much of being all leased up, and it's just so hard to get on land and da-da-da-da-da. And even, like I said, even in North Central Iowa, I've hunted public land for a long time. Just even in the last, 5 to 10 years of, knocked on enough doors and just had an opportunity to get on a couple piece of private spots. Sometimes it can be hard to do, you know what I mean? But there are a lot of people that are hunting on private ground.
Yes, and I think that there's less now than there ever has been.
Right.
What I hear everywhere in the state is that, my shotgun season looks a lot different than it did 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
When me and half the town used to drive 8 farms in a row.
Yes.
And now, this farm's owned by someone in Minnesota. This farm's owned by somebody who lives in Des Moines. And it's very different in terms of property ownership.
Yeah.
And that's changing access a lot.
Right.
Now, that's all true, but we still have a majority, apparently, of shotgun hunters that are hunting on property they don't own.
Right.
And I think that those are that's kind of an artifact of the older days. When people establish those connections, I would be willing to bet that that's a larger percentage than people that are successfully knocking on doors in today's time. Because you guys know perfectly well what whitetail deer hunting has done to property value in Iowa.
Oh,
and,
my goodness.
Dude, it's crazy.
It's crazy. And when you have dollar signs like that involved, there's no knocking on doors anymore if you have somebody that's willing to give you a lot of money to hunt there. And
Dude, I'll tell you what, the story that I always tell about that, I'll never forget this. So I'm 39. So I was in my early 20s. I bet I was 20, maybe 21. So I grew up in Belmont, Iowa. Okay. So just southwest of here. My family lives in Sheffield, Chapin, Hampton area. Okay. There was a family farm on this little creek bottom. Let's just leave it at that. It was 240 acres. And my great grandma owned it. And she passed away. Well, my grandpa was the only sibling left, or the one that was going to be in charge of it or whatever. And they went to all the family and said, hey, the majority of it was just this little creek bottom, right?
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of ag, fields that you could farm, but not much. They went to everybody in the family and said, hey, we're going to sell this, but we're going to give all the family the first chance. We're asking $1,000 an acre. And I remember me being I could count to 20 and a half, you know what I mean? 10 fingers and toes. And I was like, okay, 240 acres times 1,000, that's $250,000. I'm like, so I literally was like, how can I come up with this money? I went to the bank. Nobody would get, I'm 20 years old with, no job, a job, but no degree, no nothing. They're like, yeah, no. Find somebody to co-sign or something. And of course, then I asked everybody that I could know. They're like, no. But to think about that. And that was 20 some years ago, $1,000 an acre. And
crazy.
It's just insane to think what it's going for now.
Yeah.
It's just really, really crazy. And I guarantee you if when we're not on here, I'll show you an Onyx where that is.
Yeah.
I bet who owns it isn't from the state of Iowa. In fact, I heard that it got sold again and somebody built a cabin out there.
Oh, really?
And it's got to be just used for hunting.
Yeah,
it's just not much good for anything else.
Yeah.
What's interesting, I ran an analysis recently that looked at what proportion of deer harvested in each county is from residents that reside in that county.
Okay.
And what I've found is that almost the entire southeast to south central Iowa belt of those core big deer counties, the majority of people harvesting deer do not live, for instance, Wayne County.
Really?
60 or 70% of deer shot in Wayne County are by people that don't live in Wayne County.
Wow.
So it's something that's happening from non-residents, but obviously we limit non-resident participation. So it's a lot of people from outside of the county that still live in the state that come down to hunt.
And I've been guilty of that myself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Clear Lake, and I stopped hunting there recently just have permission pieces here, but I would drive to Sigourney. I would hunt Sigourney religiously. It was 3 hours almost to the dot.
Yeah.
And I would drive down the night before, sleep in my truck at the field driveway, and walk in the morning, do an all day sit.
Yeah.
And sometimes if I wanted to try to do it over weekend, there was a little nice little hotel in Sigourney for $34.99 a night. Sometimes I could dicker the gal down to $25, but it was cheap, and that's where I'd stay. But I would drive to Sigourney all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guilty of the same thing. I live in Ames.
You do?
Yep.
Okay.
And I almost never hunt in central Iowa. I'm coming up here to duck hunt. I'm coming a little further west to pheasant hunt.
Funny.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 2-hour drive almost every time I hunt. Just because I have...
Well, the grass is greener on the other side.
Exactly.
Isn't that funny?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's good hunting to be had in central.
Oh, yeah.
But I just, at this time in my life, I like to put some miles on.
Are you married?
No,
Oh,
I'm not.
there you go.
So,
So that's why. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. You're not tied down, so you got some, So what part of Iowa do you deer hunt?
Well, I got a pretty nice buck last year in Alameda County.
There you go.
I was
Nice.
hunting some public up there. Really fun hunt. I was sleeping in my truck. I think I was about to go for night 4 in my truck when I luckily was able to shoot a deer.
Heck yeah.
To save myself from that. It was a rough, 3 nights in the truck and all day sits. Sounds like you've been there too. It wears on you. But
And it smells on you too.
Yeah.
There's only so many wet wipe baths you can do where you just are eventually you're like, okay, I smell like a fart. Like there's no way to get away with
sure.
it. You got Pringles cans on the floor and Dr. Peppers everywhere. Yeah. Red Bulls and everything else.
It's funny. The property I hunted was chock full of non-residents,
Okay.
which I didn't expect going in. Looking at the map, I should have because it just made sense. It was very near some of our neighboring states. And But anyway, nonetheless, it was a great hunt. But I like to just jump all over. I've
Cool.
shot deer in central Iowa and
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, like I said, I graduated from Iowa State. I did a lot of hunting all on the Des Moines River there.
Boone County and
Yep. So it was kind of funny. We've talked about this on other podcasts. I don't want to say too much.
Yeah.
But I hunted a couple spots that I would go there and I would never see a single person. Now this is 8, 11. This is 12 years ago.
Okay.
12, 13, 14 years ago. Okay. And when I would go there, public spots on the Boyne River, I would be the only car in the parking lot. I mean, I'd be the only car. And I would hunt all fall. I'd hunt with a recurve bow, never see a person out there. Well, then starting at Ozonics and years later, probably about 5 years ago now, I went back there. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go back. I haven't been there in a long time. It's a heck of a spot. I'm going to go there and just the peak of the rut. I'm just going to do an all-day set. I'll go there the night before. So I go down there, pull in the parking lot the night before, sleep in the lot, get up in the morning, and I'm putting my stuff on this car, pulls up, parks right beside me. He gets out, and you can tell he's all like, oh, crap. And I'm like, hey, man, how you doing? He's like, good. And right away, I'm like, hey, man, there's plenty of ground out here.
Yeah.
Like, where are you going? He's like, well, I really want to go all the way to the back. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. I was planning on going around here, around the corner, down that cut. He's like, oh, yeah, okay. And he's like, right away, you could tell. He's like, how'd you find out about this place? I was like, he's like, dude, I've been here. I've never seen a person out here. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I said, I went to Iowa State and I hunted here and stuff. And so I kind of about ready to ask you the same thing. He's like, yeah, man. He's like, I'm from Des Moines. You're the first car I've seen all fall. I'm like, really? He's like, oh, yeah, man. He's like, I checked if it was public land. He's like, I don't know what's going on. He's like, nobody out here. I'm like, heck yeah. So this year I thought, you know what? And I hadn't gone back. It's funny, that day I had a 170-inch buck walk right up on me.
Wow.
Had my recurve. He walked right to the tree and he was facing me and he finally looked right up at me. And I was sitting there with the recurve and I wasn't going to take a frontal shot. And I'm just looking at him. And then he just kind of felt like, oh, he didn't like it. And they just turned and whirled off. But anyway, so this year I thought, you know what? Nick's just from Iowa. I'm like, this is a cool spot. Like, let's just go there. I talked it up. So we went there.
Yeah.
During the rut.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many cell cams did we pass?
I bet you seriously in the first
the first quarter of a mile?
I bet you we saw 6 or 7.
Oh, dude.
I mean, they were littered.
I mean, it was like we walked up the hill and it was like, oh, cell cam. Okay, that's okay. It's just one.
Just one.
We walk around the corner. Oh, there's another one. Walk 100 yards. Hey, there's another one. Then we walk around the corner. There won't be one over here. Hey, there's one.
It was
everywhere we went.
unbelievable.
It was, and like my brother-in-law, his dad retired, so I said, hey, go check this spot. This was before we had done that.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law was like, I think that place is a little different than it used to be. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, dude, I'm telling you, man, he saw a lot of people and he saw a lot of cameras, and it's just kind of interesting how stuff how that's kind of changed.
Totally. Yeah.
what
Well,
I
I think that there's been a lot more attention paid to public land, like
Yes,
what we have in Iowa.
sure.
We're not top of the list by any means
Right.
of public land we offer, but I think that's even more reason that we can probably expect there to be a lot of hunters using it. But then now you have these mapping tools where you can look
I
and
know.
see
Exactly.
exactly where the public
I
land.
know.
Exactly.
You know, you're not pulling a plat book out anymore, and I
Yeah.
think that I'm guessing is a big reason.
Yeah. No, it is. I know we do live in the day and age of cell cams, Onyx maps.
Yeah.
It's just really, really
So
changing it.
that brings up a point in the survey. How did you guys? I mean, I probably don't even need to ask, but did it change your experience at all when you were on that piece of public, seeing all those cell cams?
You know, I kind of feel like it made me not want to go back.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and like, here's what I will say about it. It made me not want to go back
Yep.
because I did feel like, I don't want to stand on my soapbox too much, but it made me not want to go back. It made me a little disappointed because I kind of felt like I had my own little spot.
Yeah.
And that, honestly, that's something personally that I always kind of deal with, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Is that I love to hunt because I love to do it. I don't do it for any sort of affirmation. I don't do it for all the glitz and the glamour. I just do it because I love it. Because I am an adrenaline junkie, and when I see a deer and when that adrenaline pumps through my veins, I'm like, heck yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know me. It could be
Yeah.
a yearling, and if I'm like, and I'm going to shoot it, I am on top of it.
Yeah.
I'm like so excited. I don't care what it is. So, that's why I do it. So it's just kind of this pull of like, I'm glad that other people are enjoying it too, but I want to be the one to enjoy it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like it's a weird selfish thing, but
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I haven't gone back.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I will say that my brother-in-law's dad that went there, he said it was funny. He goes, I must be the old guy now or whatever. And I'm like, why? He said, I saw a lot of young guys. And he goes, man, they carry a lot of stuff in. They had all sorts
yeah.
of techie stuff. They had but he said everybody's really friendly.
Uh-huh.
He said everybody's really friendly. And that's one thing that I don't hunt as much public ground to know, but when I was younger in my early 20s and I would hunt public ground, I always had to chain stuff in. I had a lot of stuff stolen.
Oh, really?
Vandalized.
Yeah.
I would have to chain stuff in all the time. I would go and I would put like you go buy a chain at the hardware store and I would go put it in acid to get the chrome off of it so it wouldn't be shiny.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it looked just like the tree. And I'd padlock stuff in. I'd take the bottom step off so guys couldn't climb up in them.
Wow.
I always felt like I had stuff I've had some stuff messed with this year, unfortunately,
On private land.
on private ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know if it's like that anymore. But from what he said, hey, it was really, really nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it kind of made me feel a little bit like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
But
I think for me, it didn't really bother me too much just because it was my first time ever being there. I didn't have that kind of sentimental value that you kind of had. But
Yeah.
if that, like I was kind of thinking more broadly about it, like if that happened on one of the spots that we have put more time in kind of around here, if one of the days we went out there and all of a sudden there was a bunch of trail cams, I think it would kind of affect me a little bit and make me feel a little differently about it. Because I do agree with what you said, like, it's kind of cool to go to a spot and not have so much pressure, and it sort of does kind of feel like yours, and you're out there all summer scouting and putting up trail cams and stuff. But in that specific instance, it didn't really bother me too much, just because I had never been there before. So,
but I think the same with that all said as well. I think that you and I both feel like when I walk into a piece of public, it's public ground.
yeah, exactly.
absolutely.
You know that there's
gonna be people
there
there.
could be other people there. And so, at the end of the day, I don't think it like ruins my day.
Right.
It's just
Definitely
part
not.
of it.
It is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it's part of it.
Yeah,
Like,
if you don't like it, then go buy a piece of ground.
It's
exactly.
It's a more visual reminder that other people hunt it.
Yes. Yep.
And I can take my DNR hat off and just talk about as a hunter when I scout on my phone, find a spot I want to check out in August, and I get back there and like, man, this is gorgeous. Oh, there's a tree stand, right? And then there's a shift where I'm like, I don't have the delusion anymore that I'm the only person that knows
Yeah.
about
Yes.
this. And
Yep.
I always know that's not true.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a reminder when there's equipment left or anything like
Exactly.
that, for
Yep.
sure.
Yes. Yeah. No, it is. It's kind of tricky. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I don't know. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just is what it is.
I love it, though. I love the public land kind of challenge, I think it's so fun.
For sure.
So it's awesome.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I don't know why we talk a lot about this on this podcast, but I feel like it's really started to come to the forefront again for me this last year was hunting overlooked spots.
Yeah.
I feel like there is a lot of ground, whether it's private or public, that's just overlooked.
Oh, yeah.
Even in this area in north central Iowa,
believe
around
it.
Clear Lake, just this whole area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlooked ground.
There is.
I think when you look at the state and as a whole, there's a lot of overlooked ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just a lot of stuff that just seems super overlooked.
Yeah.
Iowa is such a cool state that you can have such different kinds
Oh,
of deer
yeah.
hunts. I mean, with the diversity of land cover types we have,
Yes.
you can go up here or even further west and hunt potholes.
Yes.
For deer. I mean, but the thing to do is obviously you look for the big timber on the map and maybe find some ag around it. But yeah, clearly deer in Iowa thrive almost everywhere.
Right.
And there doesn't necessarily need to be a tree to hang a
Exactly.
stand in to have a good hunt. And
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. I mean, I see so many nice bucks when I'm pheasant hunting.
Oh, yeah. it is.
Oh,
So I don't know how I'd ever hunt them, but I mean, they're there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we
on
talk-
public ground.
We talk a lot about that too, hunting marshes. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like that's really opened up some. Well, it's funny things that I knew that I was like, geez, why haven't I thought about this in a while?
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yep.
And it's like you see all these deer trails will just go straight into a marsh. They don't care if their feet get wet.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
have hooves, right? It's
Exactly.
not like
Yeah.
their feet freeze. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like, so yeah, there's a lot to that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Yep.
So that's one thing you mentioned earlier, just as a hunter yourself and with your biology background, master's degree in something like that, how do you feel like that changes the way you hunt? Is there anything that you studied or just the things that you've learned that you're like, that you feel like you do things differently compared to buddies that hunt or like, you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Is there anything you're like, oh man, I really took this and this like is my secret sauce? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or
I wish there was because I spent a lot of hours reading deer papers and studies.
Yeah.
Right. But I can't really say that it changed in my mind, they're such totally different. Like the body of research on whitetail deer, they're usually trying to answer research questions that don't necessarily pertain to hunting, although there is a lot of those studies now and throughout time that you could look at. But I don't know that it's necessarily changed the way I hunt. I mean, I like to just experience new landscapes. That's usually my goal. So I take a week in November to go hunt somewhere. This last year I went to the Driftless.
Yeah.
Next year I'll probably go to Southern Iowa just to try that out. I like to be mobile. I always have a stand on my back.
That's cool.
Almost never leaving anything up overnight. Just because, I've felt like I get complacent when I have stands up. Now I'll just hunt there and see what happens. Whereas maybe I've got a better idea, but don't want to, how that goes. So starting every morning with a fresh slate has always worked for me. But it can, it's never fun to get all sweated up in the dark, hanging a stand, and then go sit in it all day.
Yeah, that's my kind of biggest. That's sometimes my biggest thing is just the hanging hunts. It's just like getting all sweated up.
I hate hanging in the dark, but
Yeah.
I do my fair share of it. Yeah, I don't claim to be any better of a deer hunter necessarily than I would have been if I didn't study it, and maybe worse because I probably would have had a lot more time to hunt if I wasn't in grad school. But what was really cool was learning how to hunt deer in Alabama. It was so
I bet.
so out of my comfort zone. I mean, big piney woods of basically loblolly pine plantations.
Yeah.
With, their WMAs are so different than the land I grew up hunting in Wisconsin and everything. So that really, I felt like once I figured out at least how to get on deer down there, it made it, it added a lot of tools into my box that I could apply in other places.
There you go.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But in terms of studies I've read that I'm like, wow, I'm going to start doing this in the stand. Not really, honestly.
Interesting.
But I wish there was. Yeah.
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 That's kind of cool. Still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is cool.
What do you think?
I think this is really good. I feel kind of bad because I'm not saying much, but it's just so interesting to me, everything.
Let's go straight into the memory bank.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, so I've got some questions for you guys being up here, right?
Yeah.
And so
Listen, Nick.
this is a really interesting part of the state from a deer management standpoint because Cerro Gordo County, which I assume we're in currently, was one of the counties that the harvest and other factors led to a population decline, about a decade or so ago that led to some pretty serious restrictions like no more county antlerless quotas and buck-only harvest during the first gun season. And were you hunting during that time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's great because, what we've seen happen here in Cerro Gordo County is basically a success story. And it took a while, but would you agree that the deer numbers are better than they were a decade ago?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting for me. I would go a little bit farther back. I would go back to like, I remember 2007, 2008, 2009,
Yeah.
when the deer numbers were the highest, were high, right? I mean, when the state of Iowa said, hey, we've got a problem.
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
it wasn't
Yep.
just the Iowa DNR, it was insurance companies. It was, you know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
everybody saying, we need to come together as a collective. We've got to do something. I remember in those days driving around north central Iowa, northern Iowa,
Yeah.
and seeing hundreds of deer on fields.
Wow.
I mean, I remember that. I remember being like, this is awesome. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah.
you know, and then I remember when I heard about the survey, like, uh-oh, things are going to change. And it did, right? And the numbers stay not right away, but they came down. And then we did have a couple really tough years about 10 years ago, right? And I felt like you saw the numbers drop, but I feel like I definitely can feel that it's rebounded. And
Great.
and sometimes I might not be the perfect guy to ask, because what I hear DNR guys talk about is pockets, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, I'm kind of blowing up these spots, but like, you know, Clausen's Cove doesn't let like a million people out there, right?
Yeah.
Like I've been real fortunate to be on that spot. I don't think like if you're listening to this, you can like get a hold of a person, they're going to let you out there. Like they don't let, like, I think I might be one of like the only non-DNR officer guys that
Yeah,
like
sure.
hunt that. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like I just kind of was at the right place at the right time. But there's a lot of deer out there. There's a pocket of a lot of deer. This other depredation spot, there's a pocket of a lot of deer.
Yeah.
But I would say too, like a lot of the guys my buddies that I talk to, they're seeing a lot of deer. You know what I mean? And you can see that when you see the Iowa DNR. Like this last year, I buy my first tag on August 15th.
Yeah.
I was in Montana in a wall tent
Yeah.
on September 15th at 12:01. And I get on there and I buy my tags, don't I?
Yeah.
I set an alarm. We were in a wall tent and
Yes.
I'm sitting there trying to go out and get cell phone reception to buy all my tags.
Yeah, I was like, it was a little later than 12, I think.
I was really mad because
yeah,
I
yeah.
overslept. Yeah.
And I woke up, I was like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
Couldn't get service.
Yeah, because I was buying my tags. So I was excited to see extra
Yeah,
tags here. You know what I mean?
right.
And I bought a bunch of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I like
Yeah.
to be able to have if I have a tag in my pocket and a doe walks by, like I'm gonna whack
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And that's something that hunters up here couldn't really do unless they wanted to burn an unisex tag.
Exactly.
And so that's something I'm super excited is like, I mean, that wasn't a change that anyone took lightly. I mean,
Right.
putting tags in a county that hasn't had them for a decade, it's like, we got to make sure.
And people I don't think people knew about it.
No, probably not.
No. They didn't because there was like a couple hundred and
100, yeah.
100. And they went on sale August 15th. And I remember I called my brother-in-law, I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to buy one right now. And he goes, what? I go, they got tags for Saratoga. They got tags for Hancock. Get on there now. They got tags for Wright. He goes, no, they don't. I go, yes, they do. And he bought one. And there was still some available on September 15th.
Yeah.
there
Yes,
was.
there was.
Yep.
There was
Because
Hancock.
I got a couple.
Wright counties.
Yeah.
I bought a couple then too. So
Yep.
I don't think it will be like that this year.
Right.
Like I think that it'll be an August 15th buy one,
Yeah.
and then you're not going to get a bunch.
I'd
extra.
imagine so.
Yeah.
Yeah. With 100 tags, I mean, that's the lowest we'll ever have in a county. And usually they're gone in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing too to ask you on that, and one thing I asked at that meeting was, you sell 100 tags, but that doesn't mean you're killing 100 deer.
No.
You know,
No.
it's a way lower percentage.
That's
than
right.
that. Yeah, I mean, on 100 tags, for example, in Hancock County or Wright County,
Yep.
how many deer were harvested from those 100 tags?
30 to 40.
Okay, there you go, 30 to
Yep.
40%.
Yep.
So now with that said, what's your guys' goal in
Yeah.
that regard? Like, if you're like, okay, we want to issue 100 tags, do you want to try to see 100 deer killed?
No.
Or are you just going, well, if we issue 100, we really want to shoot 30 to 40%? That's what you're.
Yeah,
is that what you're going off of?
Yeah, I mean, that's in the back of our minds when we're making the decisions. It's like let's say we remove 250 tags from a county. Well, that's going to look more like 70 or 80 less deer harvested, not 250.
Yes.
And that's an important thing to understand, when we're talking about this, because 30 deer in a county the size of an Iowa county is not going to make a population level impact.
Right.
But what it does is it starts to change the psychology of the hunters in the region and thinking, okay, maybe I can get away with shooting a doe and I don't have to worry about population impacts.
Yes.
There's tags on the table now. Like, clearly things are changing. So that's more of what I was concerned about, I guess, before proposing the changes last year was like, are we really at a point where we can start to change the narrative? Because for so long it was restrictive, let the population recover and grow, and this is how we do it. So it's good to hear that our suspicions were confirmed. And of course, we've got data in every county to support decisions, and we talk to all of our field staff too. But no, this is just a really interesting part of the state because, while over here we've had a pretty successful population recovery, we're hoping to continue to grow the deer herd as well here. Further west, like in the Great Lakes region, it's like has not worked so well. Numbers are not much higher than they were in the early 2010s when regulations got put down. And so we're trying to kind of get to the bottom of why that might be different. I think the obvious answer is habitat. There's definitely more habitat for deer here than in Northwest Iowa.
Yep.
Nonetheless, there at one point was a lot of deer in Northwest Iowa in the late 2000s.
And you've got the Great Lakes. You've got Spirit Lake. You've got Lake Okoboji. You've got big oak groves there.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yep.
And there's marsh everywhere.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like my family, my wife's family, we go to Lake Okoboji every year for like a week in June. And yeah, man, that's like hunter's paradise over there. I mean, it really is. Like you drive around Lake Okoboji and there's tons of good ground all through there.
Yeah.
But you get outside of that and it looks a lot like North Central Iowa. It's very fragmented.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? You're not going to go to Southern Iowa where you're going to see this big tract of timber.
Right.
It's just, hey, there's a farm grove. Oh, over there's a little river, there's a farm grove. It's just so much more fragmented.
Yeah.
And deer numbers are very low there, to be honest with you. And that's something that, like, I'm personally spending a lot of time this summer holding the Western Iowa Deer Initiative meetings. So there'll be 8 locations throughout Western Iowa in July. For any listeners that are from Western Iowa, keep an eye out for those meetings. Basically, the whole reason is, first of all, we want to acknowledge the population decline, but bring hunters to the table to talk about where we're headed in the future. Discuss potential regulations that could speed up the recovery, things like that. And when we're talking about Western Iowa, unfortunately, we're talking about Lyon County down to Fremont. That whole western edge is.
And you saw that even in when you did your presentation.
Yeah.
I was really surprised about not just Northwest, but West, even like Southwest had a really tough year.
Yeah.
I was really surprised by that.
Los Hills counties,
Yes.
numbers are down big time, and they shouldn't be. Iowa,
why?
The Los Hills.
Why?
So that's a question I've been trying to find a good answer to lately. What's absolutely true is that there was overharvest for sure. And I think that everyone that was in the deer program at the time, which of course I wasn't, it's always easy to have hindsight that's 2020. But there was, of course, when these decisions were made in the late 2000s, we were at historic high deer numbers across the entire Midwest.
Like what in Iowa, the population was double what it is now.
I don't know for sure that we were able to estimate the numbers back then with the precision that we can now, but the harvest was close to double.
Because one of the things to mention with that too, and you can extrapolate on this, in the late 2000s was when they really started doing more accurate harvest reporting.
Yeah,
where you had to actually start calling in your deer.
Mandatory reporting.
Yes, mandatory reporting. So and actually in this review, it talks a lot about the discrepancy between the reporting. So it's really interesting how that was, that didn't help anything.
Right. And so I'll back up a little bit and we'll talk about, so mid 2000s, you're at the back end of several decades long increase in deer numbers across the state, to the point that it was causing some serious problems, right?
Car accidents,
agricultural damage.
Yes.
We have obviously very strong agricultural interests in Iowa.
Yes.
And so you can imagine
Farm
that there was
Bureau,
a lot of people upset.
These groups who were saying, hey, we have a problem.
Yep.
We love deer, but guess what? We're seeing our bushel per acre going down.
Right.
Something has to change.
And they were right. The numbers at the time were not sustainable. They weren't what we would consider balanced. It was probably a paradise for hunters.
Yes.
But again, we're managing the population for a group of stakeholders, not just one.
Yep.
So what the people at the time did was basically flood counties with county antlerless tags.
I have in this report, it talks about some of those southern counties.
Yeah.
They issued like 5,000 antlerless tags for some of those bottom southern
Missouri
tier.
border.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like 5,400 tags in like 2009, 2010. Crazy.
And there was almost almost like that everywhere. Not that many tags, but relative to how many tags were offered previously, there was a big jump in the late 2000s, right? And what happened was, particularly in Western Iowa, a lot more deer were getting killed every year until all of a sudden they weren't, and the tags weren't getting sold. And you can look at that trend line and you see, oh yeah, like this must have been when the deer numbers started dropping. And that shows up in our population surveys, in our bow hunter observation survey, in our spring spotlight survey, and our harvest certainly reflects it too. There might have been some habitat changes. Disease played a factor. There was some environmental events like flooding in the Missouri River that definitely impacted fawn recruitment for a couple of those years. But the main culprit was absolutely overharvest. And so, now that I'm in the deer program, I mean, I think that, first of all, the managers at that time had obviously no bad intentions. It was just like, when you have that many deer on the landscape, it's hard to imagine the situation that we're in now. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you can't shoot enough, right? And there's all these pressures to. Yep. Now, Southern Iowa survived all of that, and in fact, there's still a ton of deer down there. In fact, there's counties that we'd love to have less, right? And that we're trying to find creative ways to accomplish that.
I'm willing to help.
Well, there's always a lot of tags left.
And, I know. I'm just kidding.
But Western Iowa took a hit. I'm guessing it was because of the difference in habitat. Deer were a lot easier to harvest. When we're talking about the mid 2000s, late 2000s, shotgun hunting was primarily deer drives.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And so with that style of hunting in Western Iowa, it's very easy to harvest a vast majority of your herd. Whereas in Southern Iowa, ground's a little rougher, a lot easier for deer to evade drives and whatnot.
They can escape.
Exactly. So frankly, we over harvested, laid on the gas too long. Now there may have been some other factors too that kind of kept us suppressed once we got down there. But it's an interesting topic. I'm like, very in the Western Iowa mindset now, that's kind of my summer project, is tackling that over there and engaging with hunters and just basically assessing appetite for further regulations.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, like I said, going back to that, like I said, I felt like in North Central Iowa for a long time, I'm like, man, they could give some doe tags here. And I was a part of the depredation programs for quite a few years before the doe tags became available. And like I said, I think there's you can definitely feel that it's bounced back. I feel like it's healthy here. You know what I mean? And it's awesome. Like I said, I love having, and it's interesting to hear you say, not only issuing them to harvest deer, but the perception of the hunter. You know what I mean? Like, oh, hey, awesome. Hey, there's a doe tag available.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe I don't have to feel so bad about shooting a doe. Because there is, when there isn't doe tags, you think, you heard a lot of guys be like, oh man, just don't shoot any does. Don't shoot any,
Yep.
And so, it's interesting how there is a perception within the hunting community and how people think about it.
Exactly. And so anytime there's a major change, like any amount of tags to zero is like, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Even just keeping 100 on the table doesn't quite get the hunters there in their mindset of like, wow, there's no additional doe harvest opportunities.
Right.
And we brought a lot of counties to zero in Western Iowa this last year.
Right.
And it was probably later than we should have, but we're doing what we can.
Well, and I'll tell you what, that's the interesting thing. You hear a lot about, like in journalism, there's a narrative, right? Like you think about accounting and numbers, so like, oh, well, that's numbers, like those are factual. Like you can't mix up the numbers, but you can still skew the numbers, right? And I think sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do you guys balance that? Because I think at a certain point, and again, maybe I sound like a real, but like, sorry, you have to beep that out. But, the biology of it, sometimes isn't it just really your own perception, or isn't it just kind of like a management strategy is opinion based? Like, or do you guys really just try to lean on the facts? You know what I mean? Like, for example, like, well, we lean on the gas too far. We should have done it a year. We probably should have taken the tags away earlier. Does that make sense?
I think I get what you're saying, and I'm happy to like provide a little more context for our process.
Yeah. How do you get to that? Because Or is it like is there one guy that's the main guy in charge that's making the decision, and then he's like, this is the way that I want to do it, and so this is how we're doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
And then there's this perspective for this many years, and then the next guy has a different opinion, and then we go down this road for a while. You know what I mean? Like, how do you guys get to what you're doing?
I think we've had different eras of deer management in Iowa, and I
go.
think that those are largely reflective of who was running the deer program at the time.
Yeah.
But I don't think that anybody was less fit for the role than anybody else necessarily. It's just there's different pressures in different times. And in the late 2000s, it was very clear that we needed to do something about the deer population. And it wasn't really like, let's take 10 years and figure out how we, like, it was getting pretty...
When this says report to the governor and General Assembly,
right,
that ain't good. You know what I mean? Like, like this report here, let me just hear. Yeah. There's like 95 pages. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like a book.
And that is, when you read through that, you can easily put yourself back in that time.
Yes.
You read through that report, you're like, yeah, this was during a time when deer numbers were exceedingly high. There was an abundance of property and vehicle damage, negative externalities of having deer on the landscape. Hunters were probably pretty happy, but it got to the point where we're not in a balance, right? And,
yes. Yeah.
But to answer your other question, I mean, the process that we take for making decisions like county antler list quotas is long and thorough. Like starting in January, I'm holding meetings in every district of the state that involves every wildlife staff in each district. So we're talking about Northeast, Northwest, Central, and then Southeast and Southwest.
Yep.
So every management biologist, technician, depredation staff, any of our wildlife specialists, conservation officers all get invited. And what we end up with is I'm coming with all my data. I've got spring spotlight survey data for every county, bow hunter observation data for every county, harvest data, deer vehicle collision data from the DOT, which usually paints a pretty clear picture of what's going on. But what's more important, in my opinion, is having everybody in that room that lives in that district. Like I said, I live in Ames. So for me to come up here and say, well, let me tell you about what's going on with the deer in Cerro Gordo County, it's bad taste, right?
Right.
I can look at the data and say, well, it appears that the numbers are increasing, but that might not be your experience. And it might not be the experience of anybody that's spending every day out in the field, talking with landowners, getting calls from landowners, working on public properties. So we ultimately put all of that information, to make the calls. So, I mean, when I show up to those meetings, I have a list of proposed changes.
Yeah.
Most of those end up being maintained through the process. But there's inevitably at every meeting counties that I didn't consider that don't raise a flag in the data, but yet everyone's like, oh yeah, no, like Jones County, this is going on. And so I'm really happy. I think that process is awesome. We put a lot of time into it. I mean, there's dozens of DNR staff in the room every time that are getting a ton of input from landowners and hunters and stuff like that. So I guess for any listeners that are Iowa hunters, hopefully that shows that we are very interested in your experience, but that information won't come to the table if there isn't communication between, a local field staff or something.
Yes.
So absolutely, tell your conservation officer or tell your local management biologist what you're seeing, and that information does come to the table for sure.
Yes.
And it's not, there's a lot of us that end up ultimately discussing the changes. So there's not just one person pulling the strings. Of course, it's a collaborative process. Yep.
Dude, I really appreciate you answering that question.
Yeah.
Because I know I didn't probably ask that in the most graceful way, but I think that's the perception out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You wonder, because sometimes you hear the horror stories of some other states around us. And the stuff that's happening, right?
Yep.
And you wonder, is it really based around the science, or is it just a perspective? Is it just an opinion?
Yeah.
How are we coming to this decision? So I think shedding light on that, I think that's really, really interesting stuff.
And there's one thing that I like to bring up in these conversations. So I've been at this is my third round of those meetings, right? That ended up with proposed changes and whatnot. And not one single time in my whole career have I ever had a conversation where anybody is concerned about revenue, tag revenue. That is never a concern.
That's good.
Or thought, right? Yeah. So that's an immediate... So, back when I was a hunter and not a DNR staff, of course, like they're, running a business like anybody would.
Yeah.
So that's a concern, like not for us, that really is not considered. And so we're trying to do what's best for the resource. We're trying to provide good opportunities for our hunters, but also minimize damage for non-hunters, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think the one thing that, we had a really good example of this year, right?
Yeah.
We had a piece of public ground that we were hunting on, and there was some trees that weren't the type of trees that they wanted, that the DNR wanted there.
Yeah.
Well, it was primo for deer hunting.
Yeah.
Primo. Like I've been looking at those trees for 10 years saying, just get a little bit bigger, baby. And I'm going to set a tree stand in there. We're going to start shooting deer out of there. And we went in there and we had put a tree stand in there and we could show the video. We went out there in January to take the stand down. That's another thing. I wish that they could figure out a way to change that regulation about having to have stuff off 7 days after the season for public ground. Because I know I always leave a lot of my stuff until after January 10th because I'm hunting it late.
Yeah.
And then I'm out there with cold hands up in a tree. And there's only usually one time a year that I'm nervous in a tree stand, and it's taking stands down in January.
Sure.
I'm like, I told you that day, I'm like, man, somebody's going to get hurt because you're out here late in the year, snow, and you're just trying to take a stand down. And like, does
windy.
it really make a difference if it's off 7 days after? Why don't we just like extend it a little farther where it's not so cold?
Yeah.
Maybe to the end of March, where, you know what I mean? Like, it's not maybe 10 degrees, you know what I mean? Like cold hands and just trying not to fall.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's a fair point. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I'm up there and I'm just like, and I use lifelines and I use belts and, I have a utility belt that I use, but it's still just cold.
Yeah.
It's just, but anyway, we went out there to take that stand down and they left one tree. They cut all the trees except for the tree that the stand was in.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, they did.
We come around the corner and we didn't just look at each other. We're like, oh.
They cut all the trees except for that one.
Oh, man.
Yeah, but the funny thing is I have to remind myself that I'm not the only thing that they're thinking of.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a balance.
Yep.
Not only a balance of interest, but a balance of the ecosystem. It's not just whitetails, right?
Right.
It may be owls, it may be pheasants, it may be snakes.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know what I mean? There's just more to it than just what I want with whitetails or turkeys or pheasants or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I think that sometimes we all have to remind ourselves that there's an ecosystem here.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And with any management direction or decision, there's winners and losers in the species, right? And trust me, I've heard that dozens of times from northern Iowa deer hunters. Like our public land, they came out and took the only trees we could hunt. Now the reason they do that is because those properties are being managed for a tall grass prairie.
Yes.
Right. And well, you can have a tall grass prairie with some trees, but then what you get is avian predators that like to use those trees, and that has an impact on the pheasants and game species that people like to typically pursue on those properties.
Exactly.
So there's always winners and losers trade-offs to make. And one thing I can say that I don't envy is having to make those property level decisions because there's always, there's just as many people that are happy about the trees that are gone that are probably upset. And it's just, you can never totally win. Probably,
you can't. You can't. And that's, we talked about that earlier, right? Like, I don't envy what you guys do. I mean, even sitting in that meeting, like in the meeting in Ventura.
Oh, yeah.
Man, some of the things.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, some of the
guys are pretty ruthless.
Oh man, some of the things, like, it's like cringeworthy. It's just like, man, dude. Like, and like, and I don't mind saying his name. TJ is the guy that's the biologist over here in Ventura. And that guy is always super nice.
Super professional.
If you had a heart rate monitor on him, you wouldn't even have known, man. People are like asking him real testy things, and they're like really trying to like kind of almost jab.
Yeah.
Like, all right, man, like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
They're just doing what they're supposed to be doing, And even me, I mean, I asked him about the tree thing. We had TJ on camera.
Oh yeah.
They were out there with the brush hog, and he's like, "Hey man, look at this scrape right here." You know what I mean? Like, we razzed him about that, and he's still just like just completely calm. It's just like, and they try to explain, and they're trying to be there to help, and but that's just a tough job.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the decisions I make, I feel like sometimes those staff, like local biologists, are sometimes dealing with more of the consequences than myself unless I get called up, because I'm not really interacting with hunters on a regular basis unless I get called or emailed.
Yeah.
Right on.
So, but yeah, TJ's another really good one. And I like to jump around to the different listening sessions. This year I was in Western Iowa for obvious reasons, but it's awesome to watch the different biologists. They all have different approaches to dealing with contention.
I bet.
So far, everyone I've watched does a great job.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. Like, those meetings can be very contentious.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There was there was things asked that I literally went like, oh man, I can't believe you asked that. Like, how you guys going to tiptoe around this? But yeah, they did good.
Yeah, they did a really good job.
But again, I think the theme for me on that whole thing is, I think that, there was a couple dozen people in that meeting in Ventura, but there wasn't 100 people there.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's interesting that just more people don't come out. And I think that's the thing I would say if you're listening, there is a real opportunity to have a voice. And they do have like those little sheets, to write in.
Yep.
Even like I've talked about this on the podcast before, the Iowa DNR at the Iowa Deer Classic.
Oh, yeah.
They usually have like the turn in poachers trailer.
Yep.
There's always a couple officers standing there that you can talk to.
Yep.
And like I wrote in on the sheets this year at the meeting it's the first time we gone to the meeting, but I wrote in when I was there about using red lights for predator hunting.
Sure.
And I asked, hey, why hasn't that been a thing? And they were like, well, and I've heard this from officers too. They're like, well, how many people are going to use red lights, to shoot deer and spotlight deer? I'm like, okay, fine. Well, then don't allow the red lights until after January 10th. Only allow it when the deer seasons are over. That's when the predator hunting gets good anyway. Like allow it from January 10th until October 1st or something, But yeah, I mean, I think it's like I wrote that down and talked to guys like, yeah, man, somebody will really read this. Like, this will get to somebody. Like, this is how these things start. Yep. Somewhere along the way, somebody had a piece of paper go, we should let lever actions in straight wall cartridges. Heck, that's an idea. It started somewhere. Yeah. So you never know.
And so I'll speak to that a little bit. Like, because as you mentioned, there's not an abundance of participation at these meetings.
Yes.
But the way that we hold them, like there's somebody that's actually like keeping notes, like taking minutes basically.
Yep.
Every single comment gets logged, and anything that's written down also does. And at the end of all these meetings, we have a compilation of basically how many people made each comment. And that absolutely gets looked at by us. It gets brought to the Natural Resources Commission. It is absolutely, it goes up the ladder. And everybody that's listening to this has an opportunity to have a relatively big impact on that just by participating, because as you mentioned, these meetings might have 20 or 30 people in them, sometimes less. So you could be 10% of the meeting with your comments.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so the ground that you can make on participating is so much greater than if we had hundreds of comments coming in every day. Like we don't.
Yes.
And one thing I'm trying to do with the deer program is make it more accessible and create more of like a dialogue and engagement between hunters, because, I'd be a lot more worried about doing my job well if I didn't have good communication with people who actually lived in the areas that I'm proposing changes for.
Yep.
That'd be a very uncomfortable thing to do if I didn't feel like I was plugged into any of those places.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great point. It's very well said. Because that would be tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I was going to ask you about too is not only just about the survey, but just in general, when you're looking across the state at the deer population from a DNR's perspective, not just about hunting, but just across the board.
Sure.
What do you think is one of the biggest kind of differences between perception and reality, like from like a hunter's side of things, or just what you guys do day to day?
Yeah.
Is there something you're like, man, this is one thing that we're always trying to kind of combat, the reality that people think or the perception, and this is really what's happening?
Well, I'll identify one thing that showed up very blatantly in the survey, and that was, and you guys talked about it in your episode, was when we asked people about the 5-year population trend it was in their county. And what I did was I summarized it by wildlife management unit, so there wasn't 100 bars. No matter where you are in the state, no matter where you are in Iowa, the majority of hunters are perceiving a decline in deer.
Isn't that
and
something?
we know that is absolutely not true in certain parts of the state. I mean, up here's a great example.
Yep.
but once you understand that there's obviously a bias for perceiving less deer, and
Yep.
there's a couple reasons. I think maybe hunters read between the lines on that
yeah.
question and thought,
Yeah.
well, I better not say we're perceiving more, for whatever reason. Not that that really would have,
But you're 100% on track there.
Yeah.
Because I remember even when I saw that, I was like,
yeah.
like, you know, I was like,
right.
I was
What's
like,
this going to mean?
Like, be honest. I'm like,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so no matter what, there's no matter where you go in the state, that was the interesting thing is there. If you just look at that data, it would seem that deer numbers are falling everywhere, and like we know that's not true in a lot of parts in the state. All of our population and harvest trends and what we hear from people living there is that the numbers are growing. Like up here would be a great example.
Yes.
Now the Clear Lake unit had a relatively smaller amount of people that perceived a decline, but still more than those who perceived an increase.
Right.
So what I ended up doing with that was, okay, well, clearly there's a bias for hunters perceiving less deer, which is, I think, just human nature. Like, how many times have we said, man, back in the day or 5 years ago?
I know, that's always
anything.
a thing. Yeah.
And there might be
the good old days.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Oh, you talk about the good old days.
And I think it's because, you might have just had it. Like I just had a great turkey season. I didn't shoot any turkeys. And now I'm thinking like, man, last year was a whole lot better. It's like, well, I probably had more turkey encounters, more action. Yes. I just didn't kill one.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's so many things that bias perception.
Yes.
But that's still a useful data set because I can look at those counties that had a smaller fraction of people perceiving a decline and say, I bet what this is telling me is that there's increasing deer, even though it's saying the opposite in the data.
Yeah.
But then you go on the other side of the spectrum and it's like the Great Lakes, Nishnabotna unit, Missouri River unit, those far western Iowa units.
Yep.
It's like 75% of people are perceiving a decline. Okay, there's definitely some fact to that.
Yes, exactly.
So that was interesting. It's like, we can look at our data, and again, that's not all we look at, but it's an important part. I mean, we put a lot of resources and effort into collecting it, and we make sure that it's useful.
Yep.
But so, yeah, we can at least know that deer numbers are not falling statewide.
Yes.
And interestingly, the survey was conducted before the EHD outbreak.
Right. I was just gonna
Otherwise, I might not have been so shocked by it.
So that was literally going to be my next question
okay.
is how is, it's like this EHD and CWD is this wild card in all of this.
Yeah.
How are you guys managing that, not only just from the perception, but the reality of what's happening?
You bet. So which one do you want to talk about first?
You pick.
All right. Well, we'll talk about EHD first because it was so front and center last year.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, it was our second most severe outbreak of EHD in Iowa's history.
Yes.
Based on our data. And when I say our data, that is reports that we get from the public or staff about mortalities from EHD.
Yep.
Now, our system and methods of collecting that data are getting greatly improved this year. We're actually going to have an online tool that hunters or landowners can use to actually identify where they've found EHD mortalities and get that data sent directly to the person it needs to go instead of this kind of telephone of like, I told my conservation officer, I hope he told the right person.
Sometimes they can be hard to get a hold of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. And
absolutely.
people may not have a personal relationship with any DNR staff.
You're sending a voicemail. Maybe it was bad connection.
Exactly.
Like, it's just tough.
And every time you have some sort of jump to go, I mean, you're going to lose information. And I hear it from hunters like, well, you guys must not have used the numbers I gave you because this map doesn't show that. Anyway, so the direction we're taking now is it'll just be an app on website that hunters can go to.
Will it be a part of the Iowa DNR app?
No, it won't be a part of the app, but it'll be like a web link off of our website. Okay. And so it's still being developed. It'll be ready for this next season. But I'm really excited about that because I think it's going to give us a lot better data. I know that we don't have the majority of mortalities reported to us.
Right.
And that's not that important because what matters is that our data was being collected consistently year to year. And so when we see a big jump, we know it was severe.
Yes.
But we don't know what kind of population impact it had just based on that data. So anyway, that's how we collect the data. Those are kind of its limitations currently, but also our path forward that I'm really excited about. And I'm just trying to tell as many people I can about that because I got probably no less than 30 or 40 calls to my work phone in the late summer, early fall of the most recent. And mostly in southern Iowa, people were like, man, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then I got a whole lot more during hunting season of like, I used to see 20 deer a day from the stand. I saw 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was absolutely devastating impacts at the property scale in Iowa this last year because of EHD. But the reason I made that distinguishing property level was because that's an important thing to understand about the disease is it's not affecting a county equally. It doesn't come across Delaware County and affect deer north to south at the same rate. It affects deer in pockets, and that's especially true in Iowa because our deer exist in pockets. We don't have contiguous habitat.
Right.
And so our, certain usually river bottoms or certain creek beds are affected more than others.
Yep.
But a landowner could, theoretically lose half of his deer. And 2 miles down the road, a landowner might have 0 impacts to his deer
Isn't
herd.
that something?
Crazy.
Yep. And
I
that
did
makes
not-
managing
I
it
did not know that.
I didn't know
difficult.
that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes managing it really tough, and especially, we don't have the best idea of where and how much currently. So that's why I think we're going to get there soon. We'll have hopefully better data every year that goes on as more people use this tool. But anyway, yeah, so it was the second most severe year. The history of EHD in Iowa is relatively short. That's important to keep in mind. The first year that we really had EHD was 2012, and it affected southern and western Iowa primarily. And so really we have 10 years of history with this disease that we know of, compared to places in the deep south or the northeast that have had decades and decades longer. But what's interesting is in those states, particularly in the deep south, like Texas through Florida, really, what you find is that, there's still annual outbreaks, but they're not having the population level impacts that they did in the 70s, for instance.
Okay.
And that's great news because we are very early on right now in our EHD experience in Iowa. But there's reason to believe that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Now, we'll probably have some pretty severe outbreaks to get through before that point, but there seems to be pretty strong evidence that deer can develop a resistance over time relatively quickly that lead them to being less affected, right? So that's what I always tell hunters, too, that are concerned about it. It's like, hopefully a generation or 2 from now, we won't be having these kind of conversations about deer in Iowa. I hope that's true at least. So we know that EHD has been around for about 50 more years in a lot of states than Iowa.
Yep.
But in those states, it's not really a population level impactor anymore.
Right.
So
interesting.
yeah.
Because you always hear about, like, I think about EHD and being how I am, I'm like, there's a problem.
Yep.
What's the solution?
Yeah.
This is a problem. Where's the answer? And it almost sounds like what you're saying is the answer is that it's just going to take time. It's just that a deer building up a resistance. It may take 1 or 2 generations from now. There could be more outbreaks down the road here.
Right.
Before we get over the hump of this.
And the silver lining is the more severe outbreaks we have, the quicker the process will speed up.
Right.
Because
It's almost
you basically
like the harder it rains, the quicker it stops.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, last year was a rough one for a lot of folks. Some other good news about EHD, though, is there hasn't been any counties in Iowa in that 10 years that have had an abundance of deer going into the outbreak, gotten whacked, bad population level impacts, and haven't rebounded after 2 or 3 years. Okay, so the best example that I like to use is Warren County.
It's so funny. I was just going to say.
Warren County in 2019?
Yes. So, like, a buddy that hunt near Indianola, I used to go to Simpson, and I know Warren County really, really well.
Yeah.
Buddies that literally would drive down county roads there, and you could, I did it myself. You could smell them.
Smell it. Yep.
Smell it.
So Warren County in 2019 is like the example because no county has ever been hit more severely in Iowa in 1 year than Warren did in 19. So for context, this last year, which again was almost a record-breaking year, we received about 2,000 reports statewide for dead deer, like 2,000 individual deer. Now we know that's a lot less than really died, but so in Warren County in 2019, they received 700. Right, so just a third of our entire statewide was captured in that one county.
One county.
Oh my gosh!
And you can see it in the data. Like, I made a slide for it that I could show you guys. It's like bow hunter observation drops down, right? So that's actually hunters providing we're seeing way less deer.
Mm-hmm.
Harvest went way down. Spring spotlight survey, we did not see as many deer the next year, like very clearly a lot less deer. And in in the wisdom of the people running the program at the time, they didn't make any county quota changes. And there was a lot of pressure from hunters of like, you guys got to slash tags in half.
Right.
We're really concerned about our deer herd.
Dude, it's funny because when that happened, I remember going to the Iowa State Fair.
Yeah.
And going to the Iowa DNR building, and I had buddies that were like out scouting or like driving down roads, and then like going up and be like talking to us like, what's happening in Warren County?
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
we're doing everything we can, like
Yeah.
it was a complete nightmare.
And what's insane is that 2 years after that outbreak, so by the fall of 2021, bow hunter observations and harvest were exactly where they were in 18 before the outbreak.
Really?
Yep. So what that tells me is that, first of all, deer are very resilient to these kind of diseases. They can be extremely successful rebounding when they have the right conditions for it. And Warren County is a great example. I mean, there's a lot of deer in Warren County.
Oh yeah, baby.
There are now, there were back then.
And there's a ton of just beautiful ground.
Oh,
for 'em,
yeah.
right? It's just super hilly, and it's just
Yeah.
there's just huge tracts of timber.
Yeah.
It's just like that. It's just so primo.
It is.
You talk about level B travel, and man, you go travel some level Bs in Warren County. That's just
Love me a level B.
beautiful country.
Yeah. And,
So close to Des Moines. It's just such beautiful country.
Yep.
Yeah.
But what we learned that year is that, okay, like deer numbers will recover on their own. We don't need to chase our tail, cutting quotas, bringing them back up. Now, other states take a different approach, like the Dakotas, for example, particularly South Dakota, I would say has a much more reactionary stance where they get hit with EHD, they're immediately slashing tags and hunting opportunity. And I'm not saying that that's a worse way to go about it. And I think that there's differences between Iowa and South Dakota that probably lead to that divergence in strategy. But what we found clearly with Warren County and a number of other counties that had a similar but smaller population level impact was deer are going to rebound in two maximum 3 years in almost all cases. Right. And it's pretty rare for a severe outbreak to affect a county 2 years in a row. It has happened. But anyway, so what we've learned is, like when EHD hits high deer counties, just let it be and it'll come back. Still sucks for the landowners.
Yeah.
I mean, they're having much worse hunting experiences than.
You talk about landowners, you talk about outfitters.
Oh, yeah.
Guys that have non-residents that have paid. They've been put in for 3 or 4 or 5
Yep.
years.
Oh,
they
yeah.
drew their tag and they're coming to a place where like, hey,
Yeah.
it's not that they're not here, but if it's a pyramid and at the top you got our big mature 180-inch buck and then it goes down like this and there's more deer, we don't have a lot down here
Right.
or here or here.
Yeah.
There's just the pyramid's smaller.
Exactly.
There's just
Yep.
less deer.
Oh, yeah.
That's the guys that I just feel for.
For sure. And it's terrible. It's not to make light of the situation.
No.
It's-
I'm
right.
not trying to say it like that.
But it's just that, like, well, if we did, like, adjust our county quotas in response to a severe outbreak,
Yep.
what do we know that would do? It would possibly put us in a problem state in a couple of years. If, we've struck a balance in most counties, and that balance will continue through ebbs and flows of disease, like EHD. But what we don't want to do is start chasing our tail. If we would have slashed tags in Warren County, we could have had a serious population problem on our hands in a few years.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and that's not an easy concept for hunters to understand because, and I totally understand why, they think about it. Well, so many deer got killed from this disease. We should kill less deer next year. But for whatever reason, this species has a way to rebound.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
And so chronic wasting disease, if we can get into that, is a totally another animal.
I know. Yeah.
And, am I worried about EHD in 50 years? I'm hoping that I won't have to be. Like whoever's in my role then won't have to be either. But am I worried about CWD in 50 years? Like, oh yeah. And I would say hopefully EHD is going to be a short to midterm problem for the herd, but it's inconceivable to imagine CWD not being a long-term problem, which sucks, right?
Beat my head against the microphone right now.
And I'm not the most optimistic person about CWD just because I don't know that we have a lot of reason to be, but I'm not exactly pessimistic either. Like one thing that I'll always say is that I am very sure that CWD is not going to eliminate white-tailed deer from the landscape in Iowa, right? And the reason being is that deer who are infected with chronic wasting disease, at day one, they have generally a year to 2 years before those symptoms are going to start taking hold. And they're actually going to start declining in health and shortly dying after. Meanwhile, they have 2 years to reproduce and replace themselves.
Yep.
So we're not gonna, this disease is not gonna take deer off the landscape, but what it very feasibly could do is reshape our age structures. So now if we have such a high prevalence, like there's places in Wisconsin that I've hunted that last I knew 6-7 years ago when I hunted there, they were at a 50% prevalence rate for adult bucks. So you flip a coin every time you're shooting a buck.
Yeah.
Now, if you let's say also 50% of does have CWD, that means 50% of fawns that are born have very direct and immediate exposure to CWD.
Yeah.
Even if, not to mention if they can contract it in utero, which is still being teased out. So let's say they get CWD the first day they're born or become in contact with the prions and become infected, then they're probably not going to make their third set of antlers.
Jeez.
And so that's what scares me in Iowa. Like we have this amazing quality deer herd right now with a very strong upper age category in most parts of the state.
Yep.
And I don't want to see that change. And I think that that's the biggest risk to me that CWD poses.
Interesting.
Dang.
But we'll always have deer. I just hope we always have big, gnarly old deer too.
Isn't that something?
That is crazy.
Because, yeah. Man, it's you think about what Minnesota's going through with CWD, and like it's interesting. You hear you talk about like the age structure, and you hear about that like there's not those big old gnarly deer in Minnesota anymore.
Yeah.
They're just harder to come by.
Yeah.
You're seeing everything that's just like this. It's just hard to find those just giant deer.
Yeah.
And I've heard anecdotally from people in Southwest Wisconsin where the disease is the worst, that they've also lost their upper age class of deer. Now, they're talking about for almost a decade now having close to 50% prevalence in their herds in their counties. There's not a county in Iowa that exceeds 5% that I'm aware of.
That's what I was going to say is like, how quickly can that prevalence grow from 5% to 10 to 20 to 30?
Yeah.
Like
So
what are we looking at? Are we looking at, we're 10 years away from a 50% prevalence. I mean, can you guys even estimate that, or like compared to other states, how fast they grew? Like, what are we looking at?
So CWD was first detected in a wild white-tailed deer in 2002 in Wisconsin, but that obviously wasn't the first deer that had it, right? And they used some statistics to backdate when the disease may have started in Wisconsin. And I want to say it was they think it might have been around the early 90s that the disease. So if you think about that, 30 years and they're at a 50% prevalence rate, but maybe it was there a lot longer. Who knows, right? Also, Southwest Wisconsin is not Iowa, and we have a very fragmented landscape. And I think that to some degree, that's going to help slow the spread, just because we don't have forest everywhere that the deer are constantly, right? You're following. So there's most of the habitat in Iowa is along like riverbeds and stuff like that. And so they're travel corridors, but there's not a lot of deer that are probably making a 4-mile hike across cut corn to get to the next one.
Right.
At least less than there would be if there was contiguous habitat. So I think we have more time than they did. I think that it's also great that we were aware of the disease for a whole decade before we first found it in 2013 in Iowa. So by that time, there was a CWD response plan written. We'd watched Illinois and Wisconsin go through the CWD experience for a decade, for better or worse, found what worked and what didn't work for them, and were able to apply all of that information to our management. So Wisconsin and Illinois drew a really bad hand, and we drew a better one because we had more time to see things play out. But it's interesting. I mean, this last year, I think we found CWD in 8 new counties in Iowa. When I started here 3 years ago, the narrative was we've got it in the Northeast, we've got it in the South Central, and that's about it. And these are our 2 endemic zones, and maybe every now and then we add another county to those zones. In the last couple of years, it's kind of been like a shotgun blast in central Iowa, and we're finding it pretty much from, like, there's starting to be counties that connect the two, which is scary. And it shows that it's a lot more places than we realize.
Yeah. Well, what scares me about it too is when I hear you talk about it is there's not much we can do. I mean, and again, I'm so problem solution
Yep.
problem. Let's
Yep.
figure out the answer. There is no answer. The answer is that you just have to let it do its thing.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what really sucks.
So we have some things that we can do that we're trying to strike a balance of effective management, but not cutting off our nose to spite our face. Like we really don't want to bring in sharpshooters into an area and start decimating deer populations to try to slow the spread. Like we've seen that's not a very popular, some states,
Iowa City.
well, even just like when state agencies are involved in that. I mean, there's some states right now, like Missouri, that they have a program where it's kind of a hybrid. My understanding is that they have landowners participate in the program if they want, or they offer an option of having like a government sharpshooter come out. But talking to guys over there, there doesn't seem to be the hostility towards that program that I experienced when I was living in Wisconsin, for instance. But granted, we're talking about two different time periods where this disease was novel in Wisconsin, and it's been on hunters' minds for a couple decades now.
Yeah.
So anyway, the way that we're running our CWD management program is basically when we find it in a new county, we ask ourselves one question: is the population above, at, or below the management objective? And that management objective is basically defined in that stack of papers you have there, which is essentially managing at a statewide population level consistent with the mid-90s. And they chose that period of time because that was a period of time where stakeholders were generally happy. Hunters had good hunting opportunities. Agricultural producers weren't getting wrecked.
There wasn't tons of accidents.
Right.
It
was kind of what they decided was a happy medium. Now we, of course, take it a lot further and actually look at the specifics of every county, because just a snapshot in 1995, of course, isn't going to be perfect for everywhere in the state.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, I'm probably getting ahead of myself. So we try to determine where's the population level at relative to the goal. And if it is above or at the goal, what we'll do is try to start increasing harvest to basically bring that population to the lower end of our management objective. And I know this all sounds like very subjective.
It does.
Yeah, right. But
yeah.
it's good that it's subjective, because then we're not tied to any sort of metric. What the low end of our population management objective means is that there's still good hunting opportunity. Hopefully it's a situation that we can still provide additional antlerless tags. Like I would call Cerro Gordo County at the low end of our management objective. We'd like there to be more deer. We think we could sustain a higher population, higher harvest without all the negative to come with it, right?
Yep.
But lower population densities seem to lead to slower spread of the disease. So we're still going to try to make some progress without totally ruining the hunting experience in a county. So, and we do that through hunter harvest. So really, if hunters don't want to shoot more deer, they won't, right? And so
exactly.
we could add tags to a county, or we could hold incentive hunts, if you've heard of those, in January.
Yep. January antlerless tags.
Exactly, things like that. So that's really our biggest strategy. We're trying to sample in every county in the state every year, but there's a lot of parts of Iowa that don't get sampled because how could we possibly, pull a deer from every section?
Yeah, exactly. That's so tricky.
Yep.
That's interesting stuff.
That's crazy.
Yeah, dude. I don't know, man. I don't envy what you guys have to do when it comes to that stuff, man.
CWD is a tough one. EHD is a little easier, I feel like, because we have a light at the end of the tunnel. There's no light for CWD, but there's also a possibility that these terrible effects down the road might not happen. We know that prevalence can get very high, and what that means for people making informed consumption decisions, could change. Like, I personally wouldn't eat a deer I knew was positive, but I wouldn't necessarily bat an eye at somebody who did either, It's just up to the individual. But so there's things like that could change if we have higher prevalence rates. But, I mean, the example I gave about a fawn getting it when they're born, not throwing a third rack, that seems to be probably what's going to happen if that prevalence rate is reached. But we're a long way from that right now, which is good. Yeah. I would say that we've got time, I think, to continue to do what we can. But yeah, in a 200-year scheme, we'll probably get to the same spot.
Interesting.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's wild.
Oh man, that is crazy.
Yeah, that kind of leaves you speechless a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the most optimistic topic, but
Yeah, I need to. Where's my crickets? Where's my crickets noise? I don't know which one it is here.
There it is.
So I guess tying in that survey, you might have seen the last page of that was all CWD questions.
Yep.
And what we found is that hunters still have a high willingness to hunt after CWD has been detected in a county. And that is great because we need that. Like our way out of this situation is through hunters.
Right.
Yes.
And so, it's great to see that Iowa hunters are still going to stay out there and get after it.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot of truth in that because guys want to get out.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yep, absolutely. Interesting. Man, I feel like 2 hours just went by because it literally did. And it just has been like, holy guacamole.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to go back to that you were talking about quite a ways ago is we were talking about crossbows.
Yep.
And we were talking about, it made me think when you were talking about we were talking about deer harvest and this and that and this and that. It's safe to say that the majority of the deer in the state of Iowa are harvested during the gun seasons.
Yeah, about 50 to 60%.
Okay.
Well, are you talking about shotgun or muzzleloader too?
Shotgun mostly.
Yeah, just between the two shotgun seasons, like 55%.
Okay. So like, have you guys, maybe you have the data behind this or not, but when we were at the meeting, one thing that I thought was interesting is you heard those guys talk about that, the traditional group of 20 guys going party hunting. You talk about the son, the dad, and the grandpa. Those dads are now the grandpa.
Yep.
The sons are, hey, let's bow hunt.
Yep.
Hey, let's, man, I don't want to drive deer. I'd rather sit. You guys had questions about in the survey. Do you guys sit a lot? Do you push deer? If when I saw that all, my brain went to reading between the lines of like, wow, that's interesting. Could we get to a point where all of a sudden shotgun hunting, if it's 50 to 60% of the deer being harvested per year, but there's less guys driving deer, which is probably one of the most proficient ways in a lot of spots to push deer into a spot and then try to whack them all down. You know what I mean? And if these guys want a shotgun hunt, but they'd rather sit because they're watching all these bow hunters sit, but then I see in the state of Iowa a lot, like some of these places, there's all these antlerless tags available. It's like, okay, so is the state trying to kind of make up for it because there's maybe more guys that are just sitting? And then I think about, well, if crossbows become legal and all of a sudden all these, like in a lot of other states like Pennsylvania where the gun hunters become bow hunters technically, right? Is there any fear or is there any are you guys trying to kind of look ahead on what, I know it's hypothetical and that you can go down that deep end forever, but if you saw in the survey, it seemed like there's a lot more guys that they just want to sit.
Yeah. More than you'd expect.
Yeah. And it's like, to me, that says that could really change the way gun hunting, the harvest rates of just the deer per year. And, if we are you guys have to rely on the gun seasons. I kind of say it's a necessary evil. I'm not a gun hunter. You know what I mean? I was a gun hunter and then I, heard slugs sling over my head. I'm like, okay, that's enough of that.
Yeah.
A lot of guys have that experience, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You hear about that on the radio every year about some bad accident. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But, so how do you foresee dealing with that in the future?
So that's
really long question. I'm really sorry.
No. It's a good question. And it's the question on the survey about, do shotgun hunters drive hunt or stationary hunt? I wish we were asking that 20 years ago because I bet we would have had, and that, by the way, to answer a question you guys had that episode, this was the first survey of its kind that we've ever done.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, I wish we had data going back, but I can tell you that it's changed, and I'm sure you guys are both well aware that there are, every year it seems like less people doing deer drives.
Yes.
More people opting for a stationary hunt. And what comes with that, as you mentioned, is selectivity. You're not just banging away at whatever deer run by you.
If it's brown, it's down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was the mantra that I grew up with in Wisconsin.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
And we sat. But, if you're up in a tower blind, I think you have a higher likelihood of waiting for a deer you might know is out there. You might end up shooting one instead of two deer. So there could be changes like that. But have we seen it in the harvest data, it's hard to say because, of course, this change would have been very gradual throughout time, where like every year that contingent of deer driving parties gets smaller and smaller, but not in any one year is it like, oh wow, like look what changed, So it could be leading to less deer being harvested. What we know has happened is there's much less participation in the first shotgun season than there used to be. And and I think it's because
it's so short. It's
so short. And now you have 2 weekends you can sit in a blind.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yes.
And
maybe I'm sorry to interrupt you. Maybe there's no correlation, but it's interesting to me too when you look at the fact that when I saw that all too, I was like, man, it's interesting, isn't it? All of a sudden, gun hunters aren't pushing as much; they're sitting more, and then all of a sudden, all these straight wall cartridges have gotten so much more popular, which is a bit more of a proficient method of take than a gun, which is more conducive to sitting. You know what I mean? And then I heard some of the questions about high power rifles and other calibers. It's like it's all of a sudden, is there this kind of ebb and flow where if you were a gun hunter and you were driving deer, shotguns was what you needed to do, but if you are sitting, shotgun can kind of limit you, and all of a sudden you do straight wall cartridges. Well, maybe if all of a sudden we become Wisconsin and you can high power hunt, you're sitting in, there'll be tower blinds. I mean, you drive in Wisconsin and we went to the Wisconsin show in Wisconsin Dells, and you're in Wisconsin because you can drive around there like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay, there's all the blinds. It's crazy. Could that be part of the change, right? Like, is that how you combat that? You offer more methods of take or let guys reach out a little farther. Right. I was just kind of some of the stuff that when I read that, I was like, oh, that's interesting too.
Yeah, it is. And it's an interesting connection that you
maybe
made.
That's, I think
there's
nothing there, but.
Well, I think what's true is that the hunter's behavior is changing in the shotgun seasons for sure. And I guess it's really impossible to know how that's playing out in harvest. We can see that there's ever so slightly less deer being killed on an annual basis going back a decade, but that's not even necessarily true because last year we had a pretty bumper harvest. This year it was down a little bit despite a pretty bad disease outbreak. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we're, seeing a sustained decline in harvest or anything like that. But we're not harvesting the deer we were in the mid 2000s either.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. What's cool about that survey is we plan to repeat it every 5 years. And that's going to give us a baseline. Okay, that's a question I think is going to keep changing. And I think we're going to see right now fairly balanced stationary hunters, drive hunters. That's going to start skewing big time.
I 100% agree with that.
Yep. And you know why I think is a big reason of it is access. And it goes back to a point we made before.
Yep.
What did those drive hunters rely on is being able to drive all these farms at the same day. It was a big tradition.
You're absolutely
Everybody put all the deer in a pile, cut them up together at the end. It's like not really how it works anymore.
No.
Those groups are hard to find. And
they're hard to find, and it's hard to try to push a bunch of ground because you go, okay, we're going to funnel them down to, oh, wait, we don't have permission for that anymore.
Exactly.
Oh, hey, we're going to go, oh, no, we can't cross that road. Oh, we'll drive down that 2-track. No, we don't have access to that. And all of a sudden it changes.
Yeah.
But maybe they've still got 40 acres they can put a tower blind on.
Yeah, exactly.
And so now that's what they do.
Yeah, I remember.
Interesting.
I remember in Wisconsin when I was growing up.
You're so right on track on that.
Yeah.
It makes total sense.
Yeah, when I was in Wisconsin growing up, like 8 years old, when I was old enough to walk through a chunk of woods, I mean, we'd drive deer for 4 or 5 days straight. I mean, every single person had something that we could go drive, and now we drive our home farm one day and it's the last day of the season. We just sit the rest. It's crazy how different it is.
Yeah.
All the hunting stories my grandpa told me, they were all deer drives. Like they might sit till noon on the first day and they got pretty itchy to go drive deer. And that's how they killed them.
Right. Yep. Right.
Yeah. Now what we have is basically due to this access issue, and it's only an issue depending on who you ask, but from a deer management standpoint,
that's 100% true.
It's definitely an issue because
half the guys love it. Half the guys, this is perfect. Yeah.
Right. Well, when you spend $10,000 an acre on a recreational property, I don't blame them. But at the same time, now they're to some extent exacerbating a population issue where they might be harboring a very high density of deer that they may not live at. And the guy trying to grow corn across the fence, it's a problem.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I deal with.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
100%. Yeah.
I can call that guy. I could call that guy once a month with a different joke and a different set of, I'll help whatever you need me to do on the farm. And I mean, I'll work for free.
Yeah.
Like, let's work something out. And he will tell me no every single time.
Yep.
Nope. We're growing big deer.
Yeah.
And they won't shoot but a couple deer out there.
No.
But those deer are walking over here and decimating the guy next to him.
Yeah.
And it harbors animosity,
Oh, yeah.
frustration. They don't talk to each other. You know,
Exactly.
and it's such a tricky thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So tricky.
It's convoluted with private property rights
Yeah,
and
outfitters.
Yes.
You have the permission to farm it, but you maybe lease the hunting rights to somebody else. And
Yeah.
geez, OP, it's crazy.
And so luckily our depredation program can get at that problem and make progress in some cases. But really the solution has to come down from land, neighbors
Yes.
figuring out
Yeah,
a system.
exactly.
And there's a lot of cases where I don't know that that's possible, that I like what you've identified.
Do you think that the state of Iowa will get to, I don't know if we talked about this during the podcast or before, because this is all blended together. It's all awesome, by the way. But you know how other states have biologists that will work with landowners?
Yeah.
Is the state of Iowa trying to get to that? Because I feel like there's opportunity there to kind of bridge that gap. Because I do feel like there is such a communication gap. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like, I feel like we're trying to bridge that gap right now. But I know for me, it takes two to tango.
Yeah.
And maybe the DNR this entire time, there's maybe a guy listening to this be like, we've been trying to get you to listen. You just haven't been listening there, Dumbo. I'm listening now. But I feel like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I feel like biologists meeting with a handful of landowners, is that something that you guys are trying to work out or work? Because I think that could really help bridge that gap to say, hey guys, this is what's going on in this area. You might not agree on how you want to do it, but this is what, from a biological perspective, from an ecosystem, this is how we can help the deer herd collectively.
Yeah.
So, or does that just take too much resources?
Well, hardly when we're talking about possibly the biggest issue we're facing in wildlife management in the state, and like, I'm always biased towards deer, but in my mind, it's like deer are the species driving our funding. They're the species driving our public perception.
Yep.
And anyway, our economic benefits.
Yep.
We've been expanding our depredation program throughout the years to put more staff on the ground in different parts of the state to, make some progress in terms of that outreach stuff. But yeah, nothing official, but we have talked about going the direction of like a deer management access program and what that would look like in Iowa.
Yeah,
and we're a ways away from.
I think it would be awesome.
I do too, absolutely.
Not even just depredation. I just mean deer management.
Management assistance.
Just saying, hey, like figure out a way to meet halfway on the financial side of things, or just whatever. We're already doing deer surveys here.
Yep.
Maybe they could give you guys access to do more deer survey more extensively on pieces of private ground, not just pieces of public ground or whatever.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to scratch each other's back on it and make it work. I think that could be really,
Yeah.
because I hear what's happening like with my buddy Jim in Wisconsin and how the biologists are working together. That's really neat stuff.
Yeah, they've got a good program.
And then to say, hey, we would really recommend, it would be great if you guys could try to harvest this many deer on these pieces.
Exactly.
And then they go, okay, what can everybody do? You know what I mean? And Jim's like, well, I can kill 10. Well, we killed 4 last year, but there's times we probably could have stepped it up a little bit.
Yeah.
We could probably kill 8, 10, 6. Okay, well, how do we get to this number?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then watch the deer herd in a year or two become healthier.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's in the best interest of those big landowners, recreational landowners. The major tenet of quality deer management is doe harvest.
Right.
And if you forget that aspect, your buck quality will suffer.
Yes.
100%.
But that's lost on a lot of people. They think, I don't want to shoot any deer. I don't want to put any pressure on my property.
Yes.
I want this to be a safe place until I'm ready to shoot that one buck.
Right.
Well, they're probably shooting themselves in the foot while they're at it too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a whole nother conversation about buck-doe ratio.
Yep.
Right. If you're not killing any does and you've got 9 does and you've got 1 buck, and he doesn't have to walk very far to find another one. If you're out there rattling and grunting and there ain't no deer here.
Yeah.
Or there's a ton of deer there, and there's just no reason for him to get up and cruise,
come to anything.
to set a scrape line. Like, he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't have to go and rub on every tree down that ridge line. Like, he doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Like, he just walks down and, there's another one. Here we go.
Yep.
Okay, I'll chase that one. Oh, hey, geez, you're hot and you're not. Okay, I'm going to go this way. It's just,
And how about
there's a lot of truth in that.
How about antler growth rates in high density populations? We know it suffers.
Oh, really?
There's only so many resources on a landscape, right? And the more mouths you have taking those resources, that don't have antlers on their head, that's less for the ones that do.
Right.
And it's not to say you can't grow giant bucks in big densities, or in high densities. You can do that, but it's very established that having a balanced population is the best way to achieve, maximum antler potential, which is something that people are relentlessly chasing that are, managing those properties. I mean, the inputs that go into those properties in order to achieve that is sometimes insurmountable, and yet there's ground that could be made simply just by shooting more does.
Yeah. Okay, here's a really tough question for you. So when you talk about right there about let's just say deer management, and let's say that there's 3 people, let's just narrow it down to 3 groups managing deer in the state of Iowa: the Iowa DNR,
Okay.
private just residents,
Yep.
and outfitters. Okay, what percentage of each of those groups is managing the deer population? Because you look at southern Iowa and southeast Iowa, there is a lot of outfitters down there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That are managing thousands and thousands of acres.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then there's just residents that are doing the same thing. And then there's the Iowa DNR that's managing public ground and managing regulations and da-da-da-da. But, I mean, what percentage do you think it is? Do you think it's 70% of the ground is managed by residents, 20% by guys and outfitters, and it's really only 10% being managed by the Iowa DNR? I mean, you guys have a bigger say because you're managing regulation, but still people can do what they want to do on their piece. If they don't want to kill does, they don't have to kill does. Do you follow what I'm saying?
So you're not just talking about the ground, the percentage of ground. You're talking about like the whole, what's driving the direction of our deer herd.
Yes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because you know what I mean? Like, it's funny because and again, I don't mean to sound like a so beep. But sometimes I think it's like the DNR is important, but there's times that when we go around, I'm like, man, I don't know if they're really the ones making all the decisions here. You know what I mean? Because they make the rules, and I'm not saying outfitters are breaking the rules, but that doesn't mean that they have to kill the does. Yeah. Like if they just we manage 12,000 acres and we're not going to kill a single one. Yeah. So good luck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
And residents doing the same thing, going like, well, listen, you can send out your survey, great, but we're just not going to do that.
Yep.
Who is really affecting it the most? Is it the Iowa DNR? Is it guys and outfitters? Do you guys look at it from that perspective, or you just kind of go like, hey, this is just part of it?
Well, it's a super interesting way you've set up the question. Like, I don't know that I could put numbers to it, but what I will say is I think the role of the DNR in Iowa and the deer program specifically is to provide a framework and to provide opportunity. And that's about it.
Yeah.
And everything else, I mean, deer management is not done by the Iowa DNR. Deer management is done by our hunters.
Right.
We can put tags on the table, and if they don't get purchased and stuck on a dead deer, then we didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And
this guy's nailing every one of these. I'm like throwing curveballs. That's a great answer, dude.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we think that we're truly driving the direction of deer management. But what we're doing effectively, is I don't know. I don't know if I completely agree with my last statement, because I also think that, decisions we're making annually are absolutely driving the direction of county populations, but that's not without the work and cooperation of our hunters, right?
Yep.
And that's like predicates all of the successes we had, is that our hunters bought the tags, they shot the deer.
It takes 2 to tango.
Yeah.
You
exactly.
can't, the DNR can't do anything unless people buy the tags, unless the outfitters get the hunters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It takes 2 to tango.
And in terms of habitat management, I mean, again, like over 95% of our habitat is private.
Right.
And we have 2% of our, total state in publicly accessible land that you can hunt.
2%.
2%. Yeah, I think we're 49th in the country.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So we've still got Kansas beat.
Yeah, take that, Kansas.
I think it's Kansas. If not,
whatever.
I'm sorry.
Rhode Island. You want a piece of us, Rhode Island? Come and get it. I'm just kidding.
You know what? The thing is, though, and I've lived in a number of other states, hunted in a number of other states, and it's going to sound really cheesy for me to say, but I think that we have the best managed public land in the country, probably. I mean, for deer hunting in the eastern U.S. Like, there's just, I mean, the difference in just walking onto a random WMA in Iowa and my first sit getting deer in bow range,
right?
Like that would have taken me with the same skill set, potentially a week or two to achieve where I'm from in Wisconsin on public
Yes.
land.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
I would 100%.
yeah.
100%
And so
agree with that.
what we have,
And again, I say that as a resident, but talking to a lot of non-residents that come to Iowa and hunt public
oh,
ground,
yeah.
it's just crazy.
Unreal.
They're like, this is Adventureland. You
Yeah.
know? Like,
I mean,
incredible.
The WMAs feel like a hunting paradise. Like to me, I mean, there's, sure, there's food plots and ag fields, but then you have like select cut ridges and
we
thick
need to
bottoms.
have an off the podcast conversation about just some of the deer that we have on some public ground.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about public ground?
Golly.
Yeah. So 2% of our,
I'm gonna break into a sweat here.
I already am.
we might only have 2% of our area in public land, but 15% of our deer hunters primarily hunt deer on public land. Right. So those properties are extremely important for our deer management system, right? Like that's like where 15% of our deer hunters are finding their opportunities, and it's only 2% of our area. Like that's really significant.
That is
and it
interesting.
really puts it into perspective. And now if you go to Northwest Iowa, I think it's like 30% of the resident deer hunters up there primarily hunt on public land.
Really?
And if you've seen the public land in Northwest Iowa, you'd be like, where?
Yeah, exactly.
Like this is pothole prairie country.
Right.
But they're getting it done. I mean,
Crazy.
some of those counties harvest 100 deer a season,
Right.
but still,
Well, and a lot of people look at North Central Iowa like that. I have buddies that live in Central
Oh,
Iowa.
yeah.
They're like, there's not a tree north of Ames.
Yeah,
like they're like,
right.
you get up and you're like, okay, where are they?
Yeah.
They're here.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
you just have to. It looks just. If you're not from this area and you look at North Central Iowa, you're like, geez, oh, pizza, this looks like. You deer hunt here?
Right.
Are you
Yeah,
serious?
when I drove from Alabama to Iowa, it's my first time really seeing the state. Like I had been on my buddy's farm in Southeast Iowa, but actually driving, taking the highways through the state, I remember thinking like, where are the deer? Like are they hiding in the ditches?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
But where there's habitat, there's deer. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
exactly.
Yep. No, that's a true statement. Where there's habitat, there's going to be deer.
Yep.
Yep. They it's funny because you think that they need a lot, but they really don't.
No.
Place to lay down, place to eat, and a place
Yep.
to drink.
Food,
And-
cover, water.
Yeah.
Yep. And the
that's
most
it.
important one in Iowa is cover.
Right.
And so when I talk to private landowners about like how can I make my property more attractive, whatever, better quality habitat, it's like, putting a food plot in Iowa is kind of like bringing a bucket of sand to a beach. There's
I know.
there's a
Such
lot
a
of
great
food.
point.
There's a lot of food here,
Well, dude.
And-
yeah.
but there's not always a lot of places to evade harvest.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Well, and I'll tell you what, and that's where again, it is what it is, but it's funny how like you can't bait in Iowa.
right.
But you could set your combine so it doesn't go into the hopper and it literally just flies out the back.
Yeah.
As I can't tell you how many videos I watch where the guys look like they don't even combine it. They just cut it down.
Yeah.
They literally,
Mow
they
it.
just
Yeah.
mow it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just mow it. And you're like, well, there's like a whole corn cob right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not that they're baiting. They're just technically
Yeah.
following the law.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, there's plenty of food around,
yes.
Yes,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting. Wow, I feel like we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we've covered a ton. I think we've broke the record for the longest podcast.
Have we? Yeah, 2
Yeah.
hours, 15 minutes. Gosh, there was something. Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. I'll tell you what, one of the things that I thought would be really interesting too, if you guys are going to do the survey every 5 years,
Yep.
I would be really interested to get the perspective of the 6,000 non-residents
Oh, okay.
that come to Iowa.
Yeah.
Because if you got 4,000 residents to do this deer, I know it's not just deer survey, but if you sent this to the non-residents
Yeah.
and you sent the paper copy, it'd be really interesting to get their perspective. Because when you look at the harvest rates of how many residents are killing deer and how many non-residents
Yeah.
are killing deer, there's a lot of non-residents killing bucks.
Non-residents are much more successful than our residents.
Oh yeah. And whether that
Yeah.
just means because residents are pickier,
Right.
Yeah.
maybe we're lazier. I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah.
I think it's pickier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And skin in the game. I mean, they're paying $700 for a deer
Yeah,
tag, and it might have
exactly.
taken them 5 years to get it. So
Yeah.
they're gonna make sure they get their buck.
Yes. And so I just think, I feel like there's a perspective there that'd be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, that is.
Not probably about, how do you feel about the deer you saw? Because they're going to be like, this was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? I think that it'd be really interesting to get their perspective just on a lot of different things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Not only just because I think having this conversation today, obviously, it feels like that survey was as much about just the perception of the hunter as well, not as much as just about hey, what did you harvest? What did you see?
Yeah.
And I think that there is something to be said about the perception of non-residents because they do pay a lot of money to come here.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I know I do a lot of out-of-state hunting. I go to Alaska every year, and I know my experience with Alaska is as a non-resident. You know what I mean? And so that's my relationship with them. You know what I mean? Right. So it'd just be interesting to ask the non-residents, like, what did you think?
Yeah.
How was your experience? How was the application process? What did you like? What did you not like? Did you hunt on it with an outfitter? Did you hunt on private ground? Did you come and hunt on public ground? Like, how many deer did you see? Did you harvest what you wanted? I think it'd be really interesting because I think sometimes the way we think about it and I think the way non-residents think about it is totally different.
Totally. Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see what they thought about things too.
Yeah.
I've got an interesting fact I can pull out for non-residents. So you guys are aware that there's only 6,000 tags, right?
Yep. That's 6,000 whitetail tags across all the seasons.
That's right.
And it can, across all the deer seasons, is there a certain percentage that can only be bow, gun, right?
Yeah,
it's broken down.
35% can go to archery.
Okay, 35% can go to archery.
Yep. Which is why archery specific tags can take 5 to 6 years to draw in some parts of the state.
Yeah. South, southeast.
Yep. And that number is growing, like point creep is happening basically.
And COVID didn't help, right?
Right.
Because that created almost like a little bit of a bottleneck because it stopped everybody for a year and then all of a sudden you just didn't have this steady everybody getting their tag. All of a sudden we stopped. So then all of a sudden it's just like we created this bubble, this bottleneck. Now there's even more people. So all of a sudden it used to be 3 to 4. Now you're hearing people say 4 to 5. Now you're hearing people say 5 to 6. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
And it depends where you are and what season you want to hunt. If you want a gun tag in northern Iowa, you can get one every year pretty much, right. I think. And at least that's the way it was a couple years ago. So how many people would you guys guess have at least 1 point to hunt deer in Iowa as a non-resident in the country?
Oh, gosh. Have at least 1 point in the state of Iowa?
1 point. So how many 1 point or greater holders are there in the country? And keep in mind that we only allow 6,000 a year.
Yep.
It's got to be a big number. I don't know a number, but it's got to be big.
It's interesting because when I hear that, I think about hunting fool, for example, right? So you think about hunting fool and you think about the scope of influence and the scope of the people that are looking at that and are putting in for tags all over, whatever that might be. I'm gonna throw out what I think is a big number.
Okay.
I'm gonna say 380,000.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you overshot. It's like just under 100,000.
Okay.
Still though, that is
when you said that, I'm like, man, maybe it's gonna be huge.
I probably set myself up.
Yeah. I was like, yeah.
But nonetheless, I mean,
but still 100,000 when there's 6,000.
That's unreal.
Blew my mind.
Yeah.
And what point creep is going to look like if that trend continues in 10 years? I don't know. But one thing I am happy about, though, is that number is limited. We do control the pressure that comes from across our borders.
Amen.
Yeah.
Seriously.
We provide opportunity for people to come. It's not cheap, but I think it's reflective of the opportunities here.
Yeah.
Well, and I tell you what, you hear everybody talk about it, and we talk about it all the time. I talk about it whenever I go out and about. It seems like I always get into deer hunting conversations because the minute they find out, dude, I'm telling you what, I used to be a hunting guide in Southern Colorado. Well, I thought being from Iowa was a pretty boring thing, So I was a guide and you've got clients in your vehicle and you're, hey, yes, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Iowa. Minute they find out you're from Iowa, oh, baby, that's all we would talk about for 5 days. Iowa whitetails.
Yeah.
Man, do they want to talk. And non-residents know Iowa better than I do. They know the zones. They know the counties. Where you from? Where you at? Which county? What part of the county? I mean, they know it.
Oh, yeah.
They know it.
Yep.
But one thing you always hear people say is it's managed for quality, not quantity.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that if that's what the state of Iowa continues to do, that's how everyone is successful.
Yeah.
Because if we break away from that, that's where I think it gets tricky.
Yep. And then
we manage for quality.
Exactly. And you see Western states take the same approach. I mean, states like Utah or Arizona, I mean, they're managing for quality
big time.
way more than they are opportunity, which sucks as a non-resident. But if I lived there as an elk hunter, it'd be like, keep it up.
Yeah.
That's how I would feel, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
dude, and I'll tell you what, you want to talk about us, you want to look at, and this is maybe related, not related. Look at the state of Alaska, for example. So I go up to Alaska every year. I have a vested interest in Dall sheep. Okay. So the state of Alaska, talking to troopers, okay, in Alaska, you hear them say, the state of Alaska, Dall sheep is, a lot of the populations are dropping big time, dropping, and all these different ranges. Population dropping. Geez, what's happening? Is it predation? They're just not, we just don't have the ewes. What's going on? You know, there's no as many lambs, what's going on? And what you hear people say when you really get, because when I've met the troopers and they're checking stuff in, I've been like, what do you guys think that this really is about? And every guy says the same thing. State of Alaska manages the state for opportunity. It's based around opportunity, man. It's not based around quality. It's based around getting hunters opportunity. And look at what that's turned into. There was the golden age, you know what I mean? But now all of a sudden there's less sheep. And when you manage for opportunity and not for quality, all of a sudden when EHD happens and CWD happens and unforeseen circumstances, a bad winter, a tough spring, a flood, a drought, all of a sudden when you're managing for opportunity and not quality, then you're in a pickle. And I feel like when you look at what's happening with Alaska Dall sheep and you look at Iowa, I know Iowa Whitetails and Dall sheep is a long way apart, but still they're managing for opportunity. And I don't think that's what state of Iowa is doing.
No.
They're not managing for opportunity, because if we want to manage for opportunity, they would let 20,000 non-residents and go, here we go, baby, let's rake in some money.
Or have it be unlimited like many other states in the
Exactly.
Midwest.
Just say every year, here we go. You know, and they just don't do it. And I like that it's that way.
Yeah.
It sucks for non-residents.
Yeah, as a resident, I do too.
Yeah. But I do. I think that's the golden ticket, is manage for the quality.
Yep.
So talking about the quality, one of the things that you guys have changed recently is measuring main beam.
Oh, yes. Yep.
So what's the goal of that? What are you guys trying to do there? Is it just trying to establish and really look at the age structure of the deer that are being harvested, or what's the goal of that?
So that's a new harvest regulation. So anybody who harvests an antlered deer in Iowa now has to report whether the main beam, whether each main beam is less than or greater than 14 inches.
Yep.
The reason that number exists is there was a project at Iowa State University led by Dr. Julie Blanchong. I believe Dan Adams was the grad student who did this project. And it's funny because the project that they conducted was, I don't know that there was any foresight into making it into regulations. What they were doing is trying to establish whether there was a relationship, to some degree, I think, between age and antler size relative to the different regions in the state. So what they did, with the help of a lot of DNR staff, is they sampled about over 1,000 antlered bucks throughout the state of Iowa.
Okay.
Basically every county, and measured all these different qualities of antlers, basically scored them. So you have, main beam length, basal circumference, inside spread, number of points, all of these metrics for every buck. And then the age was confirmed either using tooth replacement, and then also sending those teeth to a lab to actually get the cementum annuli counted. So It's funny, like, if you guys aren't familiar with that process, they develop rings like a tree would.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Very familiar. Yep.
So anyway,
you could go, like, sometimes you could find a thing where you can buy it's like a little wood plaque, and it has examples of the deer, of the different years of a deer's. You ever seen that?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
with,
it's like
with the wear, how their teeth wear.
Yep. And the more they wear, you can start to really see the older they are.
And that's a decent method, but the cementum annuli method takes a cross section of the tooth.
Okay.
And actually looks at it under a microscope and sees how many. So that's
way more accurate.
Way more accurate, but that's important because that aspect of the data is important, that like it was accurately aged and all the antler measurements were taken, right? So now we have this data set. Dan published his thesis, and we were sitting around thinking about how we could utilize that data. And what I ended up doing was crunching the numbers every possible way, like running tests on, is there any sort of threshold that separates age categories of bucks? So I looked at inside spread, not really. Number of points, not really. The only one I found with like reliable consistency was the length of the main beam.
Okay.
And the only relationship that was, and granted, this is like a 95% confidence, like very strong relationship that no matter where you are in the state of Iowa, if a buck has main beams that are less than 14 inches, it's like 95% chance that that's going to be a yearling buck. So that's going to be its first set of antlers that it throws.
Interesting.
Now, if it exceeds 14 inches, it's at least 2.5, could be older. We couldn't get any finer resolution than that because there's so much overlap between 2 and 3 year olds, as you can imagine.
Yep.
But we're really situated well in Iowa because our bucks grow quick that there's such a gap between yearlings and 2 year olds that we were actually able to like find that length. And, like it's 14 inches.
That's awesome.
So now we've started asking hunters that. And what it lets us do is estimate how many of our antlered bucks are yearlings, how many are adults, basically 2.5 plus. And so now we can estimate that at every county, which I've done, and it's super interesting, by the way, like how different our counties are in terms of age class that's being harvested.
Yeah.
Now, on average, because this was the first year that we included this, on average statewide, 62% of antlered deer harvested are at least 2.5 years old.
Okay.
I would have guessed a lot more personally, right?
Yeah.
Iowa with the reputation it has. And,
Yeah.
keep in mind, the only state with a higher yearling harvest rate was Wisconsin, which didn't surprise me. But I thought that there'd be more distance between the two.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I thought that would have been way higher. I thought it would have been like in the 80s.
Now, there's counties that are like northeastern, like Alameda County, Clayton County, or
Clayton, yeah.
or like the very southern tier counties like Wayne County and
Jefferson and
yeah, exactly. And those counties have 80 to 90% 2.5-year-old plus.
Yep.
But if you go up to Sioux County or Lyon County, it's like 50-50.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's super interesting. And I think that like that's just going to be another data point that we can watch throughout the years, how that changes, what that means for the population,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's really cool to know that because when I saw that, I was like, I wonder what they're getting at there.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions about it. We tried to get ahead of it. Like, this is why we're asking the questions. But there was definitely a lot of confusion and questions. But
right.
Yeah, I'm hoping after a year now that everyone's kind of used to it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's like I've talked about that a lot. You talk about like the 20-60-20 rule, right? In anything, you're going to have 20% of people that completely think you're stupid. 20% of people think that you're the most amazing. It's the 60% in the middle. Yeah. Even in your situation, 20% are going to have no idea what's going on.
Right.
20% of people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I totally get this.
Yep.
But let's worry about the 60% in the middle and just trying to communicate to that bigger majority.
Yep.
So
what was so interesting to me is like our yearlings here look a lot different than the yearling bucks I grew up with in central Wisconsin. And I'm not sure where you're from, Nick, in the state.
Western.
Western, okay. Driftless, like
right at the start of the driftless.
Gotcha.
I'm just a hair north.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So I hunted Clark County, so probably not very far from wherever you're at.
Yep.
But we're talking about like basically Northwoods land cover type, like not really an ag dominated landscape. It's mostly like piney swamps and stuff like that. I'm convinced that the majority of yearlings are, Wisconsin 11 pointers, like spikes. The first 5 bucks I shot in my life were all spikes. I never saw a racked buck till I was an adult, and I hunted since I was 10.
Wow,
that's crazy.
Now that's more of a testament probably to the property I hunted than the county. I do want to be clear about that. But there are big bucks out there, but they grow so much faster here. And a lot of our yearlings throw 8 points, which was crazy to me.
Really?
Because then down in Alabama it was the same way. All the yearlings are spikes pretty much, maybe forks.
Yeah.
Maybe a little basket rack. But here, I'm willing to say that the average yearling throws a full rack in Iowa. It might not be
That's awesome.
It might not be 100 inches, but it's probably got brow tines and 8 points. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
That's sweet. Maybe that double main beam buck is a
I was just going to say, we had this buck that had a double main beam on his right side, and he was like, how old is he? And I'm like, man, I don't know.
Yeah, we were kind of going back and forth between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
But hearing that, he probably sounds like he was a 1 year.
Could
1
be
and a half.
1, yeah.
Yeah, just 1.5 because he wasn't very long main beam.
No, not at
really
all.
short.
Yep.
He was just a little short, but he had this whole extra little beam, and it was kind of
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yep.
I'll tell you what, man. I really, really appreciate you being so willing to answer all of our questions.
Oh, yeah. It's my pleasure.
And really take the time to communicate it effectively.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that even at Ozonics I think we struggle with is you just have to figure out a way to get the message across.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really good thing to be able to have a chance to sit down with a guy like you and being so open and candid about what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate that.
Oh, thanks.
Seriously, man.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again, the other thing I want to say is thank you.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times I don't think that you guys get enough credit for what you do. I mean, I do. Like we were at that night at the thing, and I didn't even walk up to all the guys. I should have.
Yeah.
I walked up to the couple of guys like, hey man, thanks for what you do.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, don't worry about it. I'm like, no man, seriously.
Yeah.
Like you guys are like teachers. You guys are like the unsung heroes. Like nobody really gives you credit. You guys mostly just hear complaints. You know what I mean? Like it's really important what you do.
Yeah.
You know? And I know for me, like a lot of times I don't have that conservation mindset, right? Like I'm a taker, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
sure.
I take from the landscape, unfortunately, or fortunately, you know what I mean? But I think it's great that there's guys like you that are really trying to think about the big picture and trying to do what's best for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, so that's pretty
I
awesome.
appreciate that.
Yeah. No, it's pretty awesome. And as I said, it takes a lot of skill, you know, a lot of everything.
Yeah, definitely.
So thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, we've got a good team.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, if you're listening to this, I always say this about every episode. The moral of the story is, man, and I think you've said this numerous times, if you have a chance, go to the meetings.
Yeah.
You have a voice. If you have a concern, call your conservation office, talk
Absolutely.
to somebody.
Yep.
I mean, little stupid things like my boy Jet and I found mussel, right? And they're in danger. You're not supposed to pick them up. He picked them up, right? And I'm like, oh, you're not supposed to pick that up, buddy. But I saw one of the guys and I was like, hey man, just so you know, I saw this. He's like, hey, where was it? He wanted to know.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, send me a picture. He's like, I'll send it to the guy.
Same thing with the bobcat.
Yeah, we got a bobcat on camera.
Nice.
Yeah, we got a
Wow.
bobcat. Yeah, like not too far from here.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm like, we called the guy. I'm like, hey man, I almost make difference to you. 100% got a bobcat on camera. Got it on 2 cameras, mile apart.
Yeah, same night.
Yeah, same night on a video cell camera and then just a photo.
Yeah.
100% a bobcat. He's like, yeah, we 100% want to know that.
Yeah.
Do you mind telling us exactly where it was? Yeah, no problem, man. I have the photos. Like, I can drop you pins.
Yeah.
You just never know. I think we are a part of the conservation too.
Exactly.
You know, and I think
Yeah,
sometimes we
for
just
sure.
think that we're just the hunter, you know what I mean? But I think it's important to, you know, have a say and have a voice and do what we can. So,
Yeah, definitely.
but thanks, man.
You bet. Thank
I
you
really
guys.
appreciate it,
Yeah,
dude.
we'll have to do it again.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely,
Yep.
definitely.
So again, Ozonics Killerwinds podcast. I don't know what episode this is, but we are 2.5 hours in, baby. And it is hot in here because the air's not on, but I don't care.
We got to get that AC on quick.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
You bet.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it, buddy.
See you next week.
Stay classy.